Please welcome our co-host, Taya Graham and Stephen Janis.
Hello, my name is Taya Graham, and welcome to the first ever Auditors Summit sponsored by TrueTube. Myself and my reporting partner, Stephen Janis, are so happy to be collaborating with TrueTube for what we hope will be a stimulating discussion about a phenomena we have covered extensively: auditing the police and cop watching. As you may or may not know, Stephen and I host a show called the Police Accountability Report, which of course seeks to hold police accountable through investigative journalism. During our reporting, we have interviewed and covered the works of a number of auditors and cop watchers who have the same goal. And they too often find themselves in precarious situations covering policing with cell phone cameras and independent YouTube channels. It's a phenomena that has garnered millions of views, spawned dozens of what we call auditors, and raised questions about what does and does not constitute journalism. And of course, auditing has come under fire as well. Some say many of its practitioners go too far, that the people who undertake audits are simply looking for clicks and views and not really practicing journalism, but harassment. And that's one of the reasons we're holding this discussion today and partnered with TrueTube to bring it to you live. We will be joined by a variety of auditors and cop watchers to get their perspective on what auditing actually means and why they do it. But we'll also be joined by several guests who have been victims of police misconduct. And most importantly, we will discuss the institution that is at the heart of the topic: policing. This is the first of many discussions on citizen journalists and cop watchers, and we hope that for our next summit, we can have even more guests. There are so many people we would like to include with us on the summit, but we only have an hour and a half. But before we get to our guests, I want to toss to my reporting partner, Stephen Janis. Stephen is my co-host of the Police Accountability Report, and he'll give us a bit of a rundown on how this summit will be structured and what topics we will be discussing as we move forward. Just a note, before I turn this over to Stephen, please feel free to comment throughout the show. We appreciate and would like your input. And at the end of the summit, we'll read some of your questions on the air and ask our guests to respond. And please remember, this is live, so forgive us for any technical mishaps. So Stephen, can you give us a quick rundown on our topics and, of course, how we're going to structure the show?
Of course, Dave. But first of all, let me say how honored I am to be sharing a screen with you, because usually you have me outside. Anybody who watches the Police Accountability Report knows that Taya will only talk to me if I'm holding a microphone somewhere out in the Netherlands.
That's so true.
Back to you. So I am really, this is a big thing for me to be on the same screen with you. So I'm pretty excited. So today we're going to, obviously, as Taya said in the intro, auditing is the focus, but of course that is focused on policing. And so we've come up with a structured discussion so that we never get too far away from just talking about policing in general, and allowing the people who do the work, the sort of the citizen journalism work, to have a nuanced and substantive discussion about many topics that I think define policing and that we talk about on our show. So the first segment, we'll be talking about the state of policing in general, which will be a general discussion about the state of American policing, with the George Floyd trial going on right now with Derek Chauvin. Policing, is on trial, basically, police brutality. So we will talk a little bit about that and about basically the overall state of American policing. Then we're going to do a little bit of a question about what is auditing, because there are so many different types of auditors and so many different approaches to this kind of citizen journalism. So I think it's worth taking some time to define it and to discuss and ask the people who do it what they think it is. That's really important. The next will be rural over policing, which is really a topic that we kind of stumbled into, but turns out is extremely important, specifically because, as we'll say in the show, the statistics show that mass incarceration is actually rising more in rural policing, in rural areas, than it is in major urban centers. And another thing we found is that many of the police departments in small rural communities are overfunded to the extent that urban police departments are. So it's really something I don't think gets enough attention, and something that a lot of auditors have called attention to, and something that we're going to talk about. Then we'll go over militarized policing. I think all of us know, who have been out in the field, have seen, tank carriers and, SWAT teams and people dressed up in body armor. It's pretty scary. But it's also something that is purposeful, because the government gives military equipment to the police departments across the country. And we will talk about the origins of that program and what it says about American policing and some of the problems with it. And then we're going to talk about what we call incentivizing justice, which means basically that cash for cops, right? Money that drives the political economy of policing, that makes policing go. The fact that, many police officers are given overtime when they make an arrest, or that they, the police unions have so much money that they are able to pretty much subvert the political process when it comes to reform. It's a critical part of this equation that rarely gets analyzed, and that is how much money there is out there for law enforcement in this country. And then last, we'll be going over persistent surveillance, which is basically the fact that, police have a million tools to surveil us, especially online. On Facebook, and some of the arrests that were made over the last summer when we had protests and they were arresting people for their Facebook posts. And we'll go over a little bit of that. And there was a Blue Leaks, which showed a lot of money changing hands to surveil your posts and your social media activity. And then finally, we'll ask a really fundamental question, which I think all of us want to answer. Why is it so hard to reform police? And the basic way we phrase it is why policing can't be reformed. Because it seems like year after year, no matter what happens and no matter what kind of legislative initiatives there are, or how bad policing or how bad policing comes to the fore, that the political will of our leadership is incapable of really passing legitimate substantive reforms. Now, that's been a little different this year in Maryland. There has been some progress, but in general, it's been very difficult. And I think that's a very, very important topic. So Taya, that's basically the rundown of the show. It's going to be a 10-minute segments, but some of the great guests we have, some of the people we've talked about before, always have a lot to say. So I have a feeling we might go over, but we're not going to be rigid about it. The point is we want to try to touch on all these topics, but we also want to have a good conversation with some very interesting people who have done some great work out in the field that we as journalists admire, and really want to have a discussion with them about why they do what they do. So that's basically the rundown. I hope that gives people a sense of what this show will be about.
Thank you so much, Stephen. So I want to start this discussion talking a little bit about the state of American policing, and I want to focus on something specific. Why, generally speaking, are police often the subject of auditing and filming? In other words, why have auditors focused on policing? Now, not all auditors are police auditors, generally speaking, but more often than not, when an auditor's video goes viral, it does have something to do with cops. And so to begin to answer that question, I'm going to go to Irate Productions. There's a cop watcher, Aaron and Kat, a team out in California and San Diego on the West Coast. They have worked tirelessly for police accountability and reform for years, using the power of their cameras and peaceful protest. So I want to thank Aaron and Irate for joining us.
Hey, how's it going? Thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure. I had the opportunity to speak with Kat before, but this is the first time I've gotten to speak with you, Aaron. So it's a pleasure.
Thank you.
So go ahead, Kat. No, well, I just thought it'd be a good idea if you gave people just maybe a brief idea of the type of work that you do. If they haven't seen your YouTube channel, if they went there, what would they see? What would they find there?
I do want to stand out as we are preventing police violence by responding versus only reacting to the consequences of police violence. So with cop watching, we do it close to monitoring police scanner 24 hours, close to 24 hours a day. And with that, we deter police violence. We're defending our communities. We're right here. These are our neighbors. And we're also documenting how much a police officer thinks, what kind of policies that they have violated. And this is true solidarity for us. This is basically our peaceful protest defending our community. So it's, we just hand it over to Irate because he's the expert.
Yeah, so basically we try to prevent police violence by going out in the streets and monitoring the cops. We try to make it a point that when we show up, we want to let the cops know that we're watching them and that we're always going to be on scene. Our main goal is to prevent anything from happening. We're not out here trying to catch viral videos. We're trying to prevent them from happening in the first place. We see a lot of police harassment and profiling, especially with gang unit out here. They see a black guy with a red t-shirt and they instantly target him, follow them until they have enough PC to stop them for something petty. They do their pretext stop, run their name through the gang database, look for court waivers, basically look for any ways to violate people. So we just want to make sure that the cops are, at least following policy and not abusing people's rights.
I just want to ask a question now. As as your work has evolved and as you've been involved in doing this kind of monitoring, where you're monitoring actually, scanners, which is really interesting. Have you seen policing change at all? And what would you say the state of policing is in your community right now? I mean, how are things progressing? Are they aware of you? And do you think it's had an impact? And if so, in what way?
Yeah, they are very aware of me. Somehow they all know me by my name, which I have never given out. So I'm pretty sure that they have memos on us. We've been doing this for about 8 years now. When I first started, I would always get pushed back and, told to mind my own business and, flashlight me and different things to try to prevent me from filming. Through the past 8 years, I guess they realized that there's not much they can do about me. So San Diego police, for the most part, have kind of just let me be. They usually allow me to film. I'm able to get fairly close to the situation without interfering. So they've definitely grown to love-hate me, I guess you can say. So yeah, I mean, I watch a lot of other people in different cities and stuff like that, and the cops are just crazy. They instantly push people back and abuse people with cameras and stuff like that. Luckily, it's not too bad over here, but that's really not the point that we're out here. We're not necessarily testing our rights. We're exercising our rights to protect our community, and that's the most important key to us. So,
well, that's a really interesting distinction. I mean, how do you make that distinction when you say testing or exercising? Does that mean you're not being, trying to put the cops in an uncomfortable situation, or how do you make that distinction?
Right, we're basically there to monitor the interaction and prevent anything from happening in the first place. We're not necessarily trying to see what the cops will do when the cameras show up.
Definitely de-escalation.
Yeah, we're more into de-escalating and showing up and letting the community know that we have their back. When they stop somebody at 3 o'clock in the morning in a dark alley by themselves, we want the community members to know that they're not alone, and we're here to make sure that everything goes good for them.
It's interesting that you mentioned that you're trying to protect your community. You're trying to help your community. Has your camera actually, stopped an arrest or prevented a beating? I'm just curious.
Absolutely. I would say so. I mean, I have over 2,000 videos, so I mean, it's hard to do.
Wow.
But yeah, definitely. And we've also had people come up to us, when we're leaving a cop watch or whatever, and people have came up to us and said, "Hey, thank you for the video. You helped me get my case dropped," different things like that. We've also had lawyers contact us to get video footage to fight the case. So
I do want to share statistically, we have a release rate of about 85%. And those that get taken into custody, many of them say, well, your video.
I'm sorry, Kat, can you come a little bit closer to the microphone? It's a little hard to hear you.
Absolutely. Can you hear me now?
Much better. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, just wanted to say that out of our 2,000 stops, and I mean, we have thousands of stops, we have a release rate of about 85%. And those that get taken into custody, many times they get their cases dropped because we're there for our filming, and that's our basis.
That's really interesting.
Are you saying 85% of people are released?
Yes, that walk away. That means walking away from the scene and nothing happens. So
that's amazing. So I mean, basically, what you've uncovered is that 85% of the stops are absolutely useless, I guess would be the right characterization, right? I mean, you kind of uncovered something very interesting about how random police stops are and how useless, I guess. What's your conclusion from that? That's an amazing statistic.
Yes.
They profile.
Yeah.
They're profiling people.
Mm-hmm.
And it is over policing. It's not necessary. They go fishing in our community, looking for people to violate.
Yes.
And this is just by our testimonies that we see every single day. So.
And in which community are you in, just so people know who are watching?
Right. Is it San Diego?
Yeah, we're in City Heights, San Diego. It's a little east of San Diego.
I'm sorry. Can you come a little closer to your mic? We're having a little trouble hearing you again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're in City Heights, San Diego. So it's a little bit east of downtown San Diego.
Okay, so he said San Diego, downtown, east of San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal, Taya, stat. 85%.
Absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible.
I wish we had them in
used
our
to-
city.
I was going to say, I wish we had them here in Baltimore City. There was a period of time, about a 10-year period from the late 1990s into the aughts, I'd say from 2000 to
2009,
2010, where we had 100,000 arrests in a city of 620,000 people. 100,000 per year. That means 1 in 6 Baltimore City residents was being arrested, and it was for nuisance crimes. It was based on the broken windows theory of policing, where if you arrest someone for a nuisance crime, a small crime, someone with an open container of beer, someone loitering on a corner, that it was going to prevent larger crimes in the community. And of course, as you can imagine, there was a great deal of racial profiling involved.
But you think about 85%, the waste of resources, and then of course the ones they can't catch, all the people who end up ensnared in the criminal justice system, which is,
Unjustly.
shows how important this process is of auditing.
Right.
We're cop watching. And that's why we kind of want to say that we're cop watchers.
Okay.
Practicing our right, but it's something more. We're defenders, we're protectors of our community. So.
That's great. I mean, you guys deserve a lot of credit because I mean, as a reporter, I've never had that rate of, writing about a case and having it drop. That's a pretty phenomenal percentage.
Absolutely.
San Diego County is very big, so of course we're encouraging people to do the same. We can only catch so many stops, but that's what our data shows.
So I'm just going to repeat what I heard her say. She was encouraging other people to film the police as well, I believe.
Yes.
To protect their community.
Yeah. And so this phenomenon that you've uncovered, I mean, has there been any action, political action, given the fact that so many of these arrests seem to be useless? Has anything resulted in this in terms of change in policy? Because it just is astounding.
It's kind of hard to say. I do know that recently they did change some policy on the homeless sweeps that they're doing. I'm not sure of the details about that and if they're actually implying it yet. But yeah, I mean, as I'm sure you know, it's pretty hard to change policies. There's a lot of pro-cop lobbyists out there.
Very true.
Things like that. I mean, we're just people with cameras that, want to protect our community. So we're kind of limited to what we can do. We call out any policies that they violate and things like that. I will say that within this past year, there has been a lot of different policy changes within California. They changed their chokehold restraint policy. We have a curb sitting policy out here where they're not supposed to put people on the curb. And then too, when we first started, that was before San Diego Police had body cameras. We kind of helped bring that to light and, get them to start using body cameras. At the time, it was all about police accountability and transparency. Now the cops will tell you straight out of their mouth that it's more for their evidence. So it's kind of hard, they like to use things to their benefit as well.
Right, of course. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. We were so glad to have the opportunity to speak with us. And we know that you have work that you're even doing this evening. So I know we need to let you go to that. But I want to say thank you both to Aaron and Cap for the work that you're doing to protect your community and to hold police accountable. And thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Take care and be safe.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So it was great to be able to speak to Aaron and Kat of Irate Productions out in San Diego. And
I have to say that was just, that was really
85%. That is incredible.
But I think that actually what's good about, and this shows how show but not tell can be so powerful. We wanted to talk about the state of American policing, but by saying that 85% of the arrests or the encounters, let's say not arrests, but encounters with police end up going nowhere because partly and mostly because they show up, shows that most policing is unnecessary or has no real civic value other than, as they were saying, targeting people with this idea, if we stop enough people, we're going to stop crime or something. And I think that they kind of said it all with that kind of statistic is just
Exactly.
stunning.
I think it's an extension of that broken windows theory of policing,
Mhm.
that if you arrest people for little crimes, that it's actually going to prevent larger ones. And there have been studies on broken windows policing, and there's
Right.
absolutely no evidence that it makes a difference in public safety.
No.
But now we have an opportunity to move forward to our next guest.
Great.
So that we have a sense of why policing is such a critical flashpoint for camera and cell phone video, I want to dig a little deeper into what we mean by auditing. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, this is a phenomenon with multiple facets, and we can't just easily boil it down to a single sentence or definition. And I have some thoughts on it, but before I offer my own opinion, I want to introduce my next guest, Blind Justice. Blind Justice is a disabled veteran who has not just been auditing police, but also government facilities for compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. His work has stroked controversy, and like many people, he has been incarcerated and charged. So first, I want to thank Blind Justice and Mrs. Justice for joining me. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Stephen and Taya, thanks for having us.
Yeah, I think it's ironic in a sense. I mean, Blind Justice, you don't really consider yourself to be an auditor, right? If I remember, or do you, or don't you? Right.
No.
So it's kind of ironic. We have him talking here because he doesn't. And why don't you just explain that, because that will maybe help stimulate the conversation. A lot of people would say you're an auditor, but you say you're not. Tell us why.
Yeah, I think the biggest distinction is I don't really grasp or assign myself any labels. For telling a narrative, I might do that for more ease in communication. So I mean, if we want to use the term auditor, that's fine. Auditing. I think the idea is simply just to hold government accountable, and a lot of cities have internal auditing departments, and typically that's just looking at the finances, right? But they're not looking at much of anything else. HR is supposed to cover everything else about any kind of interoffice complaints and whatnot. As far as the citizens go, or the public, who's supposed to be overall in charge and making sure that the money that's being taken from them through taxes goes somewhere where they want it to go, it's ultimately on us to make sure that we kind of make sure that's working, right?
It's really interesting to make that distinction, because there's something, they do financial audits, fiscal audits, but there's also something that's supposed to be called performance audits, which are much rarer, where say they'll call 911 or call 311 in our city and see how quickly they respond. And that's kind of interesting, because that's kind of what you're talking about. That's kind of what you were doing with the disabilities, compliance, is kind of a performance audit to see, when you test the system, how does it perform? Is that a correct characterization, or do
No, absolutely, you nailed it. And I think that's what a lot of in the auditing community, I think that's what they do. Some specifically go for First Amendment checks to make sure that people in government positions and in government institutions know and respect the First Amendment right, specifically to the freedom of the press. And some test the Second Amendment. There's guys that do Second Amendment audits and walk around, guys and gals walk around with different kinds of weapons and make sure that the Second Amendment is upheld. So it's really interesting. I think there's an interesting distinction with between cop watching and auditing, and I love that you had the couple on just before us that the word defender came up, and I would say that doing cop watching is much more of a defender role, because you're going out to where there's police already engaging with people. The police are already using the power of the state to use force against somebody. And that's what law enforcement is. It's people using the term enforcement to bring force into, because somebody wrote something down and they call it law. They don't. That's one of the big things that got us started in checking up on local government, and then we expanded that to state and federal government. Was local government passing just blatantly unconstitutional laws targeting the homeless. And so what checks and balances are there in government? There's supposed to be three branches, and they're supposed to check each other, right? The law enforcers are part of the executive branch. When the city council or the state government passes a law, the enforcers are supposed to say, hold on, this doesn't match the Constitution. Each person in a uniform swears an oath to the Constitution. Each politician, when they get sworn in, they swear an oath to the Constitution. That's their primary job. And there's not this checks and balances. The judiciary, the third branch, right? They swear an oath to it. And so there's not this checks and balances. They don't ever stop and take that oath personally, to heart. Because if they did, they would stop and evaluate each law that comes down and say, okay, now this doesn't actually match the Constitution, and then they wouldn't enforce it. for the law
Well,
enforcement side, or the judge would throw something out. Yeah.
you bring up a really interesting point because technically there's nowhere in the Constitution that really authorizes a police force per se. You know,
Right.
it's the Fourth Amendment and a couple of the other Bill of Rights that they use as a sort of uh, underlying principle for making arrests, which is kind of interesting that you know the founders never thought, hey, we're going to need a militarized professional police force running around all the time with guns and trucks and stuff. And it's interesting because you always seem to bring that up. You seem to be very like sort of attuned to the Constitution. Is there anywhere in the Constitution that says, hey, you can have armed police stopping citizens? Like there's really interesting thing that you did. You wouldn't give your ID, but there's nowhere in the Constitution that says you have to give your ID to a police officer, right?
Right. Correct. Yeah. No, you're right. There is nothing that specifically enumerates the powers of the policing to the federal government. And then the 10th Amendment is supposed to is that catch-all that a lot of state and city governments like to point to, because it's supposed to delegate any powers not enumerated in the Constitution for the federal government to the states. But then everybody likes to leave off that last two words there, or three words. It says "or the people," and like the 10th Amendment is big for that, because that means that when the state government isn't doing their job right, if they're misappropriating and abusing their positions in power, then it's the people. Ultimately, it lies with the people to hold government accountable. And that's what this movement has been all about, is people recognizing, hey, the checks and balances that are supposed to be there with the three branches of government, they aren't doing it. They're not checking themselves. You can even make an argument that we don't really have separation of states. You know, the state governments are extensions of the federal government because they get so much federal tax money and they get so much influence from big Uncle Sam and the military industrial complex, you know, forcing them to adopt things or lose out on money. That's a big part of the disability work is there's actually an avenue to go after a lot of the federal dollars if they're not in compliance with all federal laws, and the ADA is a big one. So that's not necessarily what our focus is, but it is a tool to try to get them into compliance with their own rules and laws. And
You know, I just wanted to say, I think we have a bit of video of one of your encounters. Friends in Code, could you share some of Blind Justice's video with the rest of? So right here we have Blind Justice, I believe, in a health department.
Right.
And he's simply sitting there, and security guards are coming up to him. And I believe this is when he is attacked. And essentially, I believe they call it a kidnapping. He is taken out, thrown onto the floor, placed in handcuffs simply for sitting and waiting in the health department. So we'll let our
those
audience
physicians, like in your head,
continue to see
cognitive
this.
dissonance. They think they can. They think they're people.
So that was the beginning of the health department clip, where you were just simply sitting there minding your own business after asking a couple questions that you can ask in any health department, and you were thrown to the floor by two security officers who would refuse to identify themselves. And I believe it actually led to you needing to be hospitalized with a serious injury. Can you talk a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah, so that was last year, early February. And so it was before the the shutdowns and all of that stuff hit. And mental health has been a big thing for veterans. With 21 veterans committing suicide at that time, that number has gone up over the last year. But 21 veterans commit suicide every day, and so the VA mental health program is not very good. A lot of veterans go in to get help, and they come out with a bag of pills, and they're told pretty much just to deal with it.
Oh, that's terrible.
So I was going to check out other options in the community, and went to the county health department and was asking about mental health services. And that was the main reason I was there, just to find out what they had, if there was anything, if they can direct anybody anywhere. And in that process, they called the county security, which is this health department is right next to the courthouse. And I've had encounters with some of these guys at the courthouse when I was trying to find housing, for our family. And they keep foreclosure records there at the courthouse, but they lock them down. So you can only go in person and get it. And they wouldn't allow me access to the courthouse to get. So these guys already knew me, and I think they were already trying to find a way to attack me or to arrest me. And they did that day. They didn't give me any kind of indication like what it was. Like the actual one guy, the security that is an officer. And in North Carolina, evidently you can have hired police officers, private companies for policing, that you can hire security guards that also have the police training and police powers. So that guy never identified until after that. He threw me to the ground and struck me a few times, and I asked him probably 10 times, like, who are you? What are you doing? Before he finally says he was a police officer and that he was putting me under arrest well into the attack. So yeah, that case is still pending, and don't really know what they're doing with that. They charged me with trespass and with resisting an officer.
That's amazing to me because there were multiple camera angles on what occurred there. And for them to say that you were resisting arrest, I think is an absurd assertion. Stephen, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, we asked Mrs. Justice how she feels about, because that was a very disturbing video.
Yes, it was. I wanted to, that's a good point. I want to know how Mrs. Justice handles this, because some of the situations that Blind Justice has ended up in when his interactions with police have left him injured. I believe he had a traumatic brain injury that he received more bleeding on the brain. He was hospitalized from the incident that happened at the health department because they threw him onto the ground so ferociously. And of course, there's been a financial cost for your family. So I just want to know how you handle this and how you handle him championing rights in this way, even though it's had a personal cost for your family.
That's a good question. No, that particular day, that was really scary because he was live and I was far, I don't know, 45 minutes away. So I couldn't even get to that area. And then I couldn't find him for hours until I found him at the emergency room. So, yeah, it goes back and forth. Sometimes it's like, why do we even do this? Like, if people don't care about their own rights, why do I care about their rights? And, fighting for people. So it goes back and forth. It's a really challenging roller coaster. But I think that, these particular instances, he wasn't doing anything spectacular. Like, he went in and asked questions like people do and just documented what happened, like how the people responded. So I'm not sure how to answer your question right now.
That's totally understandable.
She told me before this broadcast that she was nervous about this, and she said that she wasn't going to be on camera. So I'm assuming she's told you that we're not co-located currently.
Yeah.
I'm in North Carolina, and she has the kids somewhere other than North Carolina because of the powers of the state that they've shown in the courts to go after families and children and take them away. So. Yeah, as far as the cost of the family, there's that, that we're split up, that
right.
The had taken $50,000 that she went to go get me out of maximum security prison before I was convicted, before any kind of sentencing. They had me in isolation in maximum security prison for days, and she had to get $50,000 in a backpack. She had to go to 3 different banks to get me out, and the courts have still held on to that for the last 4 months. So.
Are they charging you interest on that money? Because the $50,000, if it's borrowed, I imagine there's interest that's also racking up too on top of that, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So this is a serious financial burden for the family, as well as I can imagine how stressful this is as well.
I watched, the whole video from the health department, and I think what stood out to me was that the people there would not like identify themselves. It was like Kafka-esque, it was like what your work in there did kind of showed a side of bureaucracy that I think we all deal with but kind of ignore. And, you kept asking that one security guard, and I thought it was fascinating because you just said, hey, who are you?
Exactly. A simple question.
What was it, like 20 minutes, Blind Justice? Like, he would not even
total,
say, Isn't it? It was so weird. Like, I feel like if he had told you his name and been a little bit more accommodating, that none of that would have happened. But that's not really unusual when it comes to bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is kind of violence of the state in a way. And I think that your piece kind of exposed that to a certain extent. And it's unfortunate because really, if they had been accommodating and just talked to you like you were a person, it didn't seem possible. And I don't understand it. You know what I mean? Like, is this something you encounter a lot?
So people would be surprised. I think you'd be really surprised to find out the type of character that everyday people kind of display when dealing with somebody who's visually impaired. And on top of that, you know, the brain injuries. So like, you guys give me a lot of grace when you've had me on your show, because I have to kind of talk out thoughts or they're gone. And a lot of people on the street don't have that. You know, they don't have that kind of courtesy. They interrupt you and then the thought's gone. And now I'm not really sure where we're at in the conversation. And so in that situation in the health department, we have 3 or 4 people surrounding me, each telling me different things. I'm trying to clarify the point on the Americans with Disabilities Act, speaking to the supervisor, saying, hey, you have a disability coordinator. Let's get them here so that you guys don't make a mistake, so you guys don't make this worse. But yeah, you're right. The security guard would have just said his name, just had some common courtesy, then that would have been it. I was like, okay, hey man, you know, it's not right to grab people's equipment. And you should probably identify if you're going to give somebody orders. You need to kind of invoke whatever authority that you are planning to tell somebody to do something with.
Yeah.
But you'd be surprised just walking around and whether it be in private property, going into stores and talking to people, or just, you know, not people in the parking lot, or a lot of people think that they're the good guy, think that they're the hero in the story, and don't want to consider that they actually would be, you know, the prison guard in Auschwitz, because that's what they're told to do. You know, they're just doing what they're told to do. They're just, you know, getting a paycheck. And I think that's, if you don't come to that realization and realize that if you're not standing up against, you know, oppressive regimes, then you're probably likely to be cast in history alongside the prison guard in Auschwitz. And people are more than happy to push, you know, me around if just somebody in a store is the assistant manager and they say, oh no, don't let that guy in, or you know, whatever. It's really interesting just the last years of doing this. But then the opposite is true too, where you have people that will intervene, like, hold on, you can't do this. This isn't right. People that open doors, people that help me cross roads, you know, and it's fascinating, definitely. And we have a lot on the channel that isn't specific to policing. I think actually the majority of our content on our channel isn't specific to policing. And I think what Taya mentioned was that that gets the most views is the violence. And I think there's there's a lot to be spoken about there, that the addiction to violence that you know, people have.
That's a good point.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
Well, so Taya, you know, I think we've come, you know, it's interesting. We come to a point where I think, thanks to, again, by the examples of what people have been doing out in the field, like Blind Justice, we have sort of a situation where we understand auditing to a certain extent. And when I look at his work, is simply about putting us in contact between, you know, our kind of our expectations of humane treatment and our expectations of civil and civic rights with this coarse bureaucracy that seems to exist all around us and can't answer simple questions. I think everyone should watch the video on his channel, on his audit.
Absolutely.
Was that Greensboro Health Department, Blind Justice?
It was in actually in High Point, but it is
High Point.
Greensboro,
my fault.
Guilford County.
And because I think it's, you know, I don't want to say it's fascinating because you had to endure it personally, but I would say it's very illustrative of what auditing can do in terms of exposing cruelty that we don't necessarily all of us realize exists, and that Blind Justice, you know, because of the work he's willing to do, exposes it, and we appreciate that. And I think defines auditing, you know, in a way, right? I mean, Taya, when you think about auditors, you know, you're the first person to say, when I always say it's policing, that you shouldn't just limit it to policing, correct?
Right. Absolutely. And I think Blind Justice is a good example of the way auditing can be used to hold government accountable on multiple levels. Yeah. And him essentially auditing the health department, making sure that they were compliant to someone who is disabled and needs certain accommodations, to seeing whether or not the courthouse, the Rockingham courthouse, would allow someone who was disabled and needed certain accommodations. But also something that a video that I suggest people go and take a look at is he was working to stand up for people's constitutional rights. It was Constitution Week a few months back, and he was walking around with a sign in the neighborhood, and he was walking around with a sign that said F cops, and he was having his own personal form of protest and freedom of expression. And the reaction of I believe it was people in Madison, North Carolina,
was scary.
Was genuinely scary. As I watched that video, I was afraid for his life and for his well-being as he was attacked, as someone grabbed the sign from his hand and ripped it out of his hands, as cars circled him and kicked up smoke, and it was just short of a vicious mob. And I actually thought that he might not make it out of that situation. So he has stood on his truth, on standing up for the Constitution on many videos, and you should definitely check out his channel, Blind Justice.
Great. And we really appreciate you coming on. We will see you in a few days.
We're going to see you in a few days. Come out and talk to you.
So we appreciate you very much, and your wife, and all the work you guys do. And thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Justice.
And please stick around if you can, because we might want to have you back in the conversation.
Yes, please.
I'll hang out in the basement, but let me leave you guys with this on why I think the police gets involved in a lot of this work when you're trying to hold government accountable, because government is predicated on force. They have the monopoly of violence, the things that they can do, and they change the terms so that they can get away with it, like war, mass genocide, right? And it seems to be okay. I took part in that, and that's to my shame. But we can't do that and expect a civil society when you give carte blanche force to a certain category of people that are protected. I think in Georgia they're trying to police a protected class. It's just insane. And so this direction, we need to change it completely. And so I appreciate all the work you guys do at PAR to help us do that.
Well, we're looking forward to meeting you in person in a couple of days. So we'll tell more people about that later. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And Taya, we're going to move on to
the next
one of our favorite topics.
Absolutely. Now we're going to be talking about rural over-policing in our next segment. Now, our next guests know the consequences of over-policing quite well. Eric Brandt has been a protester and activist. He was part of the Occupy Denver movement, where he advocated for the homeless. He has worked to inform the public of their rights, educating them on jury nullification, and the performative nature of his work has led to him being well known for his costumes and giant statues, and of course his song Happy Fuck the Cops Day. And I believe Otto the Watchdog also participated in the creation of that song. He is also going to be joined by Otto the Watchdog, who was arrested for holding a sign in Royce City, Texas. But it is what happened after and the way he was entangled in the criminal justice system, which reveals quite a bit about the state of American law enforcement in rural communities. So I would like to welcome Eric Brandt.
Hey,
hello. I recognize Stephen Janis, but who's that woman in red?
It's just Taya.
Wait, let me jump in right here. So who is the actual credited writer of Happy Fuck the Cops Day? Because I know that's a little controversial. Who gets the royalties?
One of my subscribers is a patent attorney who trademarked Happy Fuck the Cops Day on my behalf.
Really?
The true literary and musical genius behind the Happy Fuck the Cops Day song has got to go to Otto the Watchdog.
Okay. So I did get that correct. It was a collaboration.
Well, it raises a really interesting question, because you've said something to Taya that has stuck with me for such a long time, that you said, I was doing regular protesting and, I was putting up signs and everything, but nothing really mattered or happened until I changed the way I was sort of, I don't know the word, protesting, auditing, whatever. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's a really critical point to this whole discussion we're having.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think what I've told people before, and I would reiterate that, and I think the record would show that very clearly, is that 3 years of fine writing and eloquence got me more abuse. Fuck cops got me the best civil rights attorney in the country in 18 days. Wow. So, I mean, that's an amazing point. The results, I suppose, speak for themselves. But I tried to speak to the mayor about some police misconduct in Westminster. I literally went up. I said I wanted to talk to the mayor. She invited me to have a seat in the lobby. I'm sitting there. I got my little wiener dog on my lap. And all of a sudden, I'm surrounded by 9 Westminster police officers, and I'm drug out of the building. I hadn't raised my voice. All I did was speak to the clerk at the desk. I mean, if you can't even talk to the mayor without, or even ask to talk to the mayor without being forcibly removed from the building. There was no vulgar language. There was no screaming. I wasn't threatening anybody. And so it's really easy for people to take a look at that guy and say, oh my God, but you got to take a look at what got there, because unfortunately what got there is still going to get you there. If you can't sit down in the county health department and mind your own business without being drugged to the ground, there's a problem with policing. And so what's the next channel? I filed complaints. They went nowhere. I went, oh, let's go to the city council meeting. Everybody gets their 5 minutes to speak at the city council meeting. Well, 60 seconds into my polite attorney-approved speech on police brutality, the mayor said, Mr. Brandt, you can't talk about that here. I said, I would encourage you not to use up my 5 minutes. And I was still talking when they drug my happy ass out of the building in handcuffs. So see, that was a 5-year ordeal where the city spent over $1 million in attorney's fees for a federal jury to order them to pay me $12,000 for the privilege. I mean, the time spans here are really long. People don't realize just how much time these things take. So, but what else could you do? I don't know, maybe you could stand on a street corner and hand out literature on a public sidewalk, pamphleting. Well, that'll get you charged with 7 felony counts of jury tampering. I had to take that all the way to the Supreme Court.
You know what? I want to ask you a little bit about that, because I found that particular case very interesting. You were essentially in front of a courthouse handing out pamphlets on jury nullification. Just for people who might not know, what is jury nullification, and why would you want people walking to the courthouse to know about it?
Right. Well, so first of all, jury nullification is, people don't know what the word means. We don't know what words mean, and it can sometimes sound like a negative thing. Another term for jury nullification, maybe more modern, appropriate term, would be conscientious acquittal. This is when a juror, despite the prosecution having met the technical legal burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt that you committed the crime prescribed, the juror can say, I don't agree with this law. So Blind Justice talked about the first branch of government being legislative, the second branch of government being the executive branch, which the police fall under, and the third branch being the judicial system. And some people might consider the jury to be the fourth branch of government, where the jury has the final say. It's the last check and balance between a tyrannical law and a free people. So the legislation could pass a law that it's illegal to paint the sidewalk in front of your house purple. And then now you paint it fuchsia, and they think it's kind of purplish, or whatever, or maybe they have 5,000 witnesses, videos, and your own admission that you chose lavender, knowing damn well that it was a derivative of purple. And the jury says that's a stupid law. So you think you have power at the voting booth? I mean, people talk about, oh, you get your voice, you get to vote. No. Where you really have a voice is in that jury panel.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point. Yeah. And so I want you to talk a little bit about how you end up with those 7 felony counts, because if you're handing out a pamphlet to educate the public, how do you end up with 7 felony counts?
Yeah, great question.
So my friend Mark Iannicelli and I decided to do this. He wanted to know more about what I was about, and jury nullification is a big thing to me. I'd like to see a constitutional amendment mandating that jurors be told by judges that they have the power to judge both the facts and the law itself. Whereas now the judge says, you're going to follow the law I give you, you can only judge the facts. And that's actually not a true statement. So I was telling him this, I said, some people hand out literature. There's this group called the Fully Informed Jury Association. They're up in Helena, Montana, and they have this literature that you can download and print for free. So he said, oh yeah, let's do that. So I downloaded and printed some, about 200 pages is all I could afford. And he says to me before we go out there to the Denver courthouse, he says, "Now, I mean, this is all legal, right? We're not going to get arrested or anything." And I said, "Oh, for Christ's sake, Mark, don't be ridiculous. It's protected speech. Besides, what prosecutor in the world would put that very pamphlet that tells the jurors they don't have to follow the law in the hands of the very jurors that have to make the decision, because it would be evidence, right?" So I said, "Don't be ridiculous." So we were there. We were handing out literature for a while. The question is, are you here for a jury trial? Was what I was asking. And you might be a defendant. You might be a juror. You might be a witness. Either way, I only had 200 flyers. I wanted the best bang for my buck. So I go inside the courthouse to help a homeless woman try and clear a warrant that she had missed court on. Easy to do in Denver if you just go in and take care of it. And while I was coming out of the building, they were arresting Mark and dragging him away. So I emailed the district attorney and I said, what the fuck is wrong with you people? I handed out at least as many flyers as Mr. Yanasomi, and I demand equal justice under the law. Well, I got it. And
Wow.
and they charged us each with 7 felony counts of jury tampering, and it was listed that we distributed literature to jury pool member. Count 2, distributed this to jury pool member, jury pool member. There are 14 lines of jury pool member. We don't even know who they are. And so anyway, the district court judge said, this is free speech. This is no different than people standing out on the sidewalk with signs that say, acquit the Chicago 7, which of course people did do. And he said, that's not jury tampering. What's jury tampering is when you open up your little lunchbox in the jury deliberation room and there's a little piece of paper in there and it says, find the defendant guilty. That's jury tampering. So he dismissed it as protected speech. Well, Mitch Morrissey wasn't having any of that. So he filed an appeal on the dismissal. And the appellate court said, this is free speech. Don't be ridiculous. And well, they didn't like that. So they appealed it up to the state Supreme Court.
Wow.
And finally, the Supreme Court did come down with a ruling, and they said, it's free speech. So if you are distributing literature in front of courthouses in Colorado and they arrest you and charge you with jury tampering, you may be able to cite the people of the state of Colorado versus Eric Brandt.
Wow, that's
So
amazing.
you have actually made case law. This is amazing.
That is amazing.
I
But,
just have to point that out.
But Eric, it's really interesting you say it, because as a reporter, you're right about one thing, and maybe that's why they put such an effort against you, because the jurors are the one place where average people just walk in and have the last say.
That's right.
I've covered legislatures, I've covered all other forms of government, and we have no say. But when you get to the juror situation, that's just people off the street who don't really want to be there, and maybe that's why they really came after you, because you were actually touching a nerve where just average folks can be like, "Fuck this."
As a matter of fact, in the chat, judges hate.
Sorry, you
jury,
inspired me to swear. I apologize. Eric does that to most people. I think.
Yeah, they spent about, we guesstimate we pulled some records, tried to interpolate some data, but we guesstimate that the whole jury nullification saga cost the city of Denver somewhere around $10 million to defend.
Jesus.
That is absolutely an atrocious waste of taxpayer money.
And that factors in a substantial increase, not just in juries acquitting people, because they did, educated jurors did acquit people. There was a market, almost a threefold increase in acquittals, but there was a more than threefold increase in the number of defendants willing to take their cases to jury trial.
Yeah.
They ended up having to rehab 2 courtrooms and open up 2 whole new courtrooms.
Very
That's a great, as you know, and you can talk about this, the number of people who plead guilty in federal system is what, like 97, 96%. It's crazy, right? No one goes to court.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, in Denver it was about 92%.
Is it 92%? Yeah.
Plead guilty. And so when you've only got a handful of people going to trial, if you just increase that by a small number, then it completely inundates the court system, and they have to make decisions on cases. We're seeing effectively this situation happen right now. The Colorado Supreme Court justices just advised the Colorado legislature a few weeks ago that they conduct about 2,700 trials a year in the state of Colorado in county and district court. And that because of COVID restrictions and not being able to conduct trials, nobody's taking deals. And in fact, the prosecutors haven't really taken, they've been like buried in the sand with their heads on this whole, you guys need to make deals, right? They're like encouraged, come on, you guys, you got to make deals. The system is getting clogged. Well, as of a month ago, the state of Colorado had 14,500 trials pending. And it's a system that can statewide only actually conduct less than 3,000 trials a year. So, yeah, a handful of people saying not guilty and forcing them to trial makes them decide between the axe murderers and the jaywalkers.
How can you even walk around Colorado without them just arresting you just for the fact that you're Eric Brandt? I mean,
well, it's funny you should say that, because actually,
God, I mean, you gummed up the system and you made it fair, made it better, but that's not what they want.
No, and it's not the only time I've made case law either. So
no, I know, it's amazing. It really is. And it looks
like I'll be making case law on at least one other case again. So.
Well, we
It's
had this
amazing.
really weird because we listened to one of your sentencing, and we thought the prosecutor was your attorney because
Right.
you,
The
had
prosecutor
you
was
charmed
speaking
her? I mean,
so
what was it?
eloquently on your behalf. It was I truly thought she was your
Magic
defense attorney.
I
mean, just to let people
conjured
know to
up a
understand.
powerful magical spell and caused herds of glitter fart unicorns to descend upon them.
Eric was facing sentencing, and Tay and I were listening to the
Mhm.
sentencing, and we thought the attorney who was talking about Eric was his own attorney because she was so positive about
She was
you.
so positive and so eloquent on Eric's behalf that we didn't realize it was the prosecutor. It was
Prosecutor.
great.
That's
So
an
you definitely have
extraordinarily
some-
rare occurrence that I doubt you'll ever see again.
Okay.
I mean, there are definitely some people who've been sympathetic to your approach, but I was curious, considering that your activism has gotten you arrested over 200 times, how has like
ran
the
out of fingers.
mainstream media in Colorado treated you? Just curious. We're
Mainstream
independent
media?
mainstream
Oh,
media. We're
no.
independent investigative journalists. So I'm just curious, has the mainstream media how they portrayed you? Have they ignored you?
Well, the Westward has covered me pretty well.
Mhm.
Which the Westward is I don't want to misrepresent the Westward, as I don't want to mischaracterize it, but the Westward has always been a publication that has no qualms about publishing a taboo subject. But when you're talking about television time, you're talking about thousands of dollars a minute, and that means that you need big wallets. And big wallets have these interesting little quirks. Big wallets are funded by commerce, by business. And so anytime there's a down undulation even thought of, then these advertisers snap their wallets shut. So mainstream media doesn't really have the ability, and you guys can probably speak to this more than I could because you've been on the inside of that, but mainstream media can't tell the public about too much taboo because the social unrest shuts down the wallets. And if you've got a television camera running, you can't afford that. So I have
very well said.
had people come to me from news media, from television media, and say, we're sorry, we've been trying to launch this story. We've been putting it up to our producers, and they're telling us absolutely not. We've been flat out told that the Downtown Denver Business Partnership will not allow them to cover us. And in fact, some of our stories that have been published that have been positive have actually been removed after the Denver Downtown Business Partnership went to them and said, you're going to take that down. After the police went to them and said, you're going to take that down. And we actually have documented occurrences of this.
Yeah. I mean, I think the best example was the interview that was conducted with you while you were in jail by a TV reporter that was never, it sounded like she was trying to get you to cop to a crime. But
yeah, it was a local Fox affiliate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, she was a Fox affiliate. That was, and I was absolutely wise to that very quickly.
Yeah. Well, Eric, you are always one of the most interesting people I've ever met, and I met a lot of people.
That's true.
I even met Jay-Z, so I've met a lot of people. It's true. But so we appreciate, because you really, the thing is that I think that is interesting about this whole discussion of auditing is that there has been serious reform. You were able to get First Amendment training for police officers, right? Which sounds kind of funny.
And body cameras.
And body cameras. And that's in which part of Colorado?
I think it was Englewood,
Colorado. Yep.
Right.
So when I go around and I out getting gas or whatever, and convenience store at the store or whatever, I'll see people with tattoos all over their arms, right? And I'll be like, oh, so you like tattoos, huh? And they say, oh yeah. I said, well, what's your most expensive tattoo? And it's got to be this one right here. And I said, well, I have a $30,000 tattoo. Really? Yeah. I said, oh yeah. Would you like to see it? And then I say, well, of course, I didn't pay $30,000 for it. I got it for free, but the police had to pay $30,000 when they arrested me for it. And what do you do with that?
Wow.
Even if you're a blues bag, that is a term you could use. You heard it here first, blues bag. They arrested you for an offensive tattoo. You can't defend that, right? It would be like trying to defend Derek Chauvin. And
well, they don't seem to mind trying to defend the indefensible.
Yeah, I mean, they are spending a lot of money. Supposedly it's $1 million defense, plus he has like 13 attorneys.
I've been watching that $1 million defense, and I haven't seen $20 come out of it yet. Even Otto the Watchdog gets better lawyers in Texas, and we don't have lawyers.
I have to concur with that assertion, Eric.
No, that's been a very weak case.
That's hearsay. Why aren't they objecting here? Wait a minute. A 9-year-old girl. Okay, do you see the officer in the courtroom today? No. And his attorney points at him and tells him to take the mask off and stand up. Wait a minute. The identity of the defendant is the essential element. Why would you give it away? Anyway.
No, you.
Yeah, it's been horrifying.
I feel like they're just doing it for show.
He's getting totally railroaded. I have to think that there's like two I know this isn't your show, but there's like two strategies maybe that they're banking on. Maybe the police union has to defend this guy because they have to defend their own, but they know for goddamn well that if he wins this case, the city's burning down.
Right.
Or his attorneys are doing a great job of ensuring that there are excellent issues for his ineffective assistance of counsel appeal. I don't know.
Yeah, that's possible. We fucked up so badly you get an appeal. I mean, that is absolutely possible.
Yeah, it's that bad, right?
Yeah,
it really is.
It's
truly sad.
We're going to go on to our next segment.
Yes, we definitely want an opportunity.
Please stick around because I'm sure we can rip. We're going to have you back in at the end.
Yes, we would very much like you to join us.
I'm going to drop then so that I can change my name to Otto because we're on the same device here.
Okay, so I will take a moment.
We're going to bring Otto in on the military.
Otto the Watchdog.
Next segment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, isn't it wonderful how technology's brought us together? I'm going to leave then. When I come back in, I'm not going to be myself.
Okay.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay. Thank you.
So we also want to introduce Otto the Watchdog, who was arrested.
Hey, Tay, but we have to introduce the next segment because we're already.
We'll introduce our next segment as well.
We're
still in the segment on rural over policing.
But we're still that's over. We need to move on to militarized policing, but we can have Otto. Otto can talk about that too, but we should have Nic Pettit and maybe Otto because we're at 8 o'clock.
Okay. Well, let's bring in Otto, and we'll also bring in Nic Pettit, and maybe we should bring in Nic Pettit so that he can. Wonderful, Nic. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, nice to see you guys again.
Great to see you. So, Nic Pettit is a resident in Ohio who was standing on his front porch when he saw a gun raid occurring in his community, and he took out a cell phone camera to record what was happening. He also saw a young person, a teenager, who was standing there being interrogated by the police and slapped in the face by a police officer. And he did the thing that any good citizen should do, which is to speak up. And when someone's child is being hit by an adult, he spoke up. So I'd like to ask Friends in Code if maybe he could share that video of Nic Pettit and the militarized policing. We want to be able to show what happened when Nic was standing on his own front porch and a group of SWAT officers, and this is in Ohio, came onto his own property from his God-given right to use a cell phone camera on his own porch. Friends in Code, could you share that for us?
Hey, you ain't supposed to smack him like that. The fuck is wrong with you? Hey, I got all that shit on camera. What's your name, bro? Hey, you wasn't supposed to smack him in the face. The fuck is wrong with you? Hell no, man. I'm on my property. I ain't got to listen to you. Man, I'm on my property. You can't come over here and do nothing to me. Hey, you ain't got a search warrant. You can't come over here, man. Man. Hey, look, I got you all on camera right now. I'm on my private property. Hold on, man. Misconduct. Hold on, man. You're under arrest. For what? Come on. I ain't even doing nothing but record this whole situation. What are you doing? Give me the phone. You're interfering with this. I didn't interfere with nothing. All I said was Crystal, down.
Wow. I guess are we muted or are we? You're muted, Taya. Taya, you're muted.
That was an incredibly powerful video. And I just want to say that someone in the chat just said how brave you were to do this, to stand up for this young person, and how terrifying it was to see all of those militarized officers turn their full force against you.
I mean, you were really facing it looked like a military, occupying force at that point. Are you crazy? What were you doing?
Honestly, I mean, at the beginning of the entire occurrence, I really didn't know what was going on. Like I had left my bedroom. I went down to the basement to start doing laundry. I didn't even notice what was going on outside. I heard the commotion and I come outside and I noticed all the officers and I pulled my phone out. While I was recording, the initial incident, I started to explain what I had overheard because of officers being there, a couple of days prior to the incident. And talking to them, I'd kind of got a somewhat of a background story on what had happened and led to this incident. And in looking around while recording, I noticed all the other officers in the situation. And around the time they had everybody come out, there was only 3 people in the house. It was just a 67-year-old woman, her 9-year-old grandson, and a 15-year-old grandson. the 15-year-old grandson, I mean, in the video, you can't really see it. It's not that clear. But the 15-year-old minor who was assaulted come out of the house. He had just got out the shower. Like, his hair was wet. His body was still wet. And he had his hands in his hair. He had pajama pants on. And the officer reached up and smacked him. You know, and at that point, you know, as a father of three, it's like, yeah, these are police officers. Yes, this is a potentially dangerous situation. But if my child just got out the shower and they're coming out barely dressed and you're assaulting my child for following orders, I'm going to speak up and say something. Like, and I would expect my neighbors to do the same.
Absolutely.
So I figure, you know, I do that same thing to my friends. And at that point, you know, that's when, for a lack of better expression, that's when all hell broke loose.
Wow. But just before, you know, we should acknowledge the arrival of Otto the Watchdog, who, you know,
Otto the Watchdog,
my second favorite performance artist auditor out there that we'll get to in a second. But, you know, we're just talking to Nick. And of course, Otto, if you want to chime in, feel free to make any comments.
This segment areas on militarized policing, which I think you got to see an excellent example of. If you saw the gear those officers were wearing, the guns they were holding, and the way that they stormed Nic's porch to take him down, I think is an excellent example of militarized.
But I do like the fact, and I have to say this about auditors, like I admire you guys because you said you don't have a warrant to people who were dressed like they were the Gestapo, you know? I mean, as if suddenly, and maybe Otto, you can comment on this, but because you've tried to invoke the Constitution, but you're like telling these guys you don't have a warrant, it kind of seemed like, okay, these guys are not like sitting there with the little thumbnail book of the Constitution and going to refer, oh, he's right, he doesn't have a warrant, they're going to back up or something. But
they don't care.
They don't. The fact that you were willing to actually make that, because that was kind of a statement of futility there. But Otto, when your encounters with police too, I mean, you know, invoking the Constitution or saying I'm right, that usually makes things worse, right?
Oh, yeah.
Every time.
Yeah, it usually does. You know, a lot of people want to invoke their rights, but they don't actually know what they are. The police, especially, right? So usually, when you say, no, you can't do that. Well, they've heard that 10,000 times, and they actually, maybe they don't actually know that they can't actually do that. And we say that all the time as a joke. You know, we'll hear that somebody got arrested for standing on a sidewalk filming a traffic stop, and they'll say, well, they can't do that. Well, we all know that we're joking with each other, right? But that's something that's said all the time. And then the next, right after somebody says they can't do that, they'll say, well, it's time to sue them. Not realizing that it could take a decade.
Wow. Well, actually, you know, it's interesting you say it because Nick, you actually fortunately had the ACLU kind of side with you, and now they are going to sue. You are suing the Columbus, Ohio Police Department, correct?
Yes. Well, actually, it's a little difficult. We can't name the Columbus Police Department itself, but there was some loophole in that. But we are able to pursue the 4 officers who directly came onto the property.
I see. Okay. And that's really interesting. So you're suing them personally?
Yes. As far as I'm able to speak about, yes.
I understand if you're in the middle of a lawsuit, but we can say it. I mean, the ACLU, because of Taya helping a little bit, hooking them up with the ACLU.
I pestered the heck out of the ACLU. Yes, I did.
And it's interesting because I think it comes down to constitutional issues, which is really interesting because it's kind of it was kind of good that you invoked your constitutional rights because that's what it comes down to. It was an unlawful search and seizure. But just, you know, Nick, in terms of like how it's affected you personally, because I know this has been like traumatic for you, is there still like a lingering effect from this? Because you were incarcerated too, right?
You were incarcerated briefly, right, Nick, because of this?
Yes. I actually was incarcerated for 22 days. During the first 5 days of this incident, I didn't have any charges pressed against me or wasn't booked into the system, is what they say here in Columbus, Ohio. I don't know if that's the same around the United States, but and my wife, she was worried. She didn't know what was going on. And, you know, to this day, she still freaks out if she thinks that I'm going to end up back in jail because I had another case that was pending at the time that I'm now on probation for. But any time that there's any hiccups or anything with that or any court cases, she's terrified and it's hard to deal with.
And that's completely understandable. I know if I had been your family member and witnessed what happened, I would be terrified as well. And that you spent 22 days in prison for what was obviously an assault is absolutely absurd. And I also want to note that when I got the body camera footage of the officers, when I got the footage of how when you were transported in the paddy wagon to the prison, I just want to note that you were incredibly polite and conscientious the entire time in your interactions with with those law enforcement officers. And I think that's one of the reasons why the ACLU saw your case and said, we have to support you on this, because at all times you conducted yourself properly and within your rights, and it was the officers who overstepped their boundaries and broke the law.
Yep.
I mean, I gotta say, like, it in this situation, it wasn't every officer there. You know, there's a difference in it. This is something that I've come to the conclusion of, in my honest opinion, and I don't expect anybody to follow this, but in today's society, there's a difference between a police officer and a cop.
That's interesting.
And I know, and I don't want anybody to coin this or anything like that, but you know, cop is a way to break down what we today call the militarized police, which would be a corrupt officer pretending.
Corrupt officer pretending. Interesting.
So you have a police officer, a man who swore an oath, who protects that oath, who follows the Constitution, who does his job the right way. Then you have officers like the four who came into my yard, assaulted me, broke my $400 phone, put me in jail, took me from my family, ruined my record, even my criminal record, even more than what it already has been damaged, messed up an opportunity for me not to be on probation and end up with a even better job than what I was working at the time. And now I have injuries today, physical injuries today, that still bother me from that instance, where I can't work jobs that I normally would have been able to work. So it kind of breaks the faith in the system.
Well,
absolutely, that's completely understandable.
And go ahead, Taya. Go ahead.
No, I just want to say we do have some video of Otto, and I wanted to share it. Now, Otto, initially, the reason why Otto was drawn to my attention was, of course, because of Noli D, who helped introduce me to the cop watchers and auditors community. And she said, you have to go watch this guy's channel. So I went to his channel and I saw him standing on the side of the road holding a sign. And it was a simple sign. It wasn't partisan in any way, but it was simply a commentary on the state of affairs. And it said, shit, the system is fucked up and stuff. I may be paraphrasing, but it was a simple sign, just a commentary. And he was also on the side of the road sharing food. He was giving away food to anyone who wanted it. And then police officers came to infringe upon his ability to hold a sign on the side of the road. And I think we have some video to share with what happened next to Otto and his interactions with police. Friends in Code, do you have some video we could share? Okay. So there's the infamous sign. And this is Otto passive resistance right there.
Well, isn't that called the auto flop?
It's now known as the auto flop, but it is a form of passive resistance. He doesn't want to participate in his own kidnapping. He doesn't want to participate in being taken away to prison. And so he passively resists by dropping to the ground. So these are his signs. And like I said, they're not particularly partisan. They're simply a comment. There is a little bit of profanity in them. Well, but is it worthy of taking someone to jail, of giving them a criminal record, of wasting taxpayer dollars processing him? Truly, is this the best use of our criminal justice system? So let's go back to Otto and to Stephen and to our guests and to see what they have to say. So Otto, tell us a little bit about that moment when you're simply holding a sign with your commentary. And like I said, you were on the side of the road giving away free food. Is that correct?
That day I was actually I was just holding the sign. The day that I was giving away the free food that I got the ticket for was the day before.
Oh, okay. The day before you were giving away free food.
Yeah, the same sign, and it's supposed to be funny. I think it's funny. A lot of people think it's funny. As a matter of fact, most people would be driving by and taking pictures of it and posting it to Facebook, right? Not because they were offended, because it's funny. And it's funny. Like you said, it's not political. It's not partisan in any way. both, no matter what your political opinions are, you can agree that shit is fucked up and stuff. Just in general, you might not like the language on it, but it's not, it's just funny. It's just funny. So yeah, when there's actually this guy out in New York, I think it's New York, where I think he hands out jury nullification. I'm pretty sure it's the jury nullification guy up there, and he's constantly getting arrested. And they'll come up and he'll stand there. He'll keep handing out papers until the cops tell him that he's under arrest. And as soon as they tell him he's under arrest, he just lays down on the ground.
The old guy.
Yeah, the old guy. He's, I don't know if he's still doing it or not, but.
Well, Otto, the thing that struck me that was really interesting is there anything going on in that city other than you holding a sign that necessitated 4 police officers to show up and arrest you? I mean, it strikes me as a real luxury of policing to have the time to police a man who's holding a sign, which, pretty much the First Amendment is pretty clear about that. What does that say about the town you were in? Were you surprised when they showed up to arrest you? I mean, I can't really it's hard for me to understand.
I was surprised when they arrested me. I wasn't surprised that they showed up, but I thought that we would have a nice little conversation and then it'd be over because that's happened before. It just so happened that today they wanted to arrest me. You asked if they had anything else to do. No, they didn't have anything else to do. Just before they showed up to take me to jail for my sign, they were harassing a guy that was going through the dustbin on the vacuums who had permission to do it. The call was someone stealing change from the vacuums at the car wash. So, whatever that means. And that town has a lot of suspicious activity calls. That's where Karen calls 911 because something bothered her. That kind of stuff.
Oh goodness.
Right.
Right.
I remember we went through all that. It was like 30% of the calls were for suspicious people, which it was like, so it must be the Karen capital of the world, basically.
Yeah, and that's a little bit misleading because that's just the calls where there's a suspicious person where they don't arrest somebody, where they don't have something else to report after the fact. Right.
Is this Royce? Is this Royce City or is this different? Is this Royce?
Yeah, it's Royce City. Right. It's all the same area, the same stuff. It actually doesn't really matter what city it is or what state it is. It's pretty much the same everywhere. You'll have big city problems and then you have little city problems, and then right there on the edge is where you have a little bit of both, right? Where the country people are still wanting to be country, and then the city people are moving in. Right. And then the cops get a huge budget and they hire a bunch of new people, and there's not any cohesion in the unit, and then you get all kinds of good stuff.
I want to ask you a question because at least it seems like in rural police officers, because of that lack of crime and things to do, that they're almost more imperious than cops here in the city who will just kind of ignore you. But it seems like what you've shown through your work is that these police, really want to interfere with people's lives on some level or create a sense of order that benefits them or something, because really there's no way I can imagine a Baltimore police officer taking the time to arrest a guy with a sign, but yet you've evinced this sort of response from them. And I think to a certain extent, it seems like rural cops are almost more arrogant in some ways.
I think there's some truth to that. I think that that they don't think that they're not the problem, right? The problems are in the cities, and they're not in the towns, right? There's a distinct difference between urban policing and rural policing. When we see that through our like we were talking to Irate earlier, the cop watches that they do is totally different than when you go out to the country, because they don't like you being on the other side of a double-laned highway with a divider in the middle of you. They'll still come over and want to ask you some questions. What are you doing? Things of that sort. And there's always a reason. They always have a reason, whether it's legitimate or not, to do whatever it is that they want to do, and they'll try to escalate it if they can. And like we were watching with Nic's video where he was standing on his porch, that's actually not all that uncommon. They don't really care about your property rights or whether or not they have a warrant. They'll figure all that out later. not being able to sue the police department. That's kind of a thing, mainly I think because they're sovereign, and that like literally you can't sue the city unless they have like some sort of policy, or where it's like where it's become so accepted to violate the policy that it basically becomes the policy, and that's really difficult to prove in basically any situation, especially when they won't give any records.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there's certain normal things that occur in a larger city, and I've been trying to, for example, get basic records out of Denton, Texas, because we talked to you actually connect us with that poor man who was arrested for. Just to give people a backstory, his name was Randall Thompson. He bought a car at police auction.
Right.
He drove it out, and they pulled him over almost right away, and then found drugs buried in some part of it and arrested him for drugs that were actually still left in the car. But Denton, Texas is like, I said, how much do you pay police officers? Very basic questions. And they were like, you're going to have to file a Texas Information Act for that. Like, not stuff that's really unusual should require that. And it's been interesting. And then you have the other phenomena in these small towns where you have like 10 police officers and 30 crimes for a whole year. So there's like 3 crimes per cop. And these cops are making more money probably than anybody, So it's a real twisted and warped political economy. And also to Nic's issue, even scarier was when Nic got his video of the body cam. They took the time to blank out all the people with the militarized police identities.
Yes, it almost made them secret police.
These are police officers who are paid for by the taxpayers, supposedly enforcing the laws of this country, and they're secret. I mean, sorry, you guys elicit a lot of emotion in me because I've covered cops for a long time, and the stuff that I see when I report on what you do is just, I literally, they were a secret police. Now, people say that doesn't exist in America. Well, it exists in Columbus, Ohio.
It sure does. Yeah, and these people will back the blue until it happens to you, and they will continuously support the police because they have no idea what actually happens. Hey, you know what? We want to talk about rural policing. Well, after this whole COVID thing, there's been a whole ton of people that go buy an RV. Sometimes brand new RVs. And I feel really sorry for those people because they have no idea what it's been like in the last couple of years, right? So all these people are losing their houses and thinking, hey, we're going to go do the whole van life thing because it's trendy. And the next thing you know, you're trying to take a nap before you go to work the next door, and they bust your windows out and yank you out and charge you with trespassing and resisting arrest and failure to identify. And heaven for fucking bid, you should have a joint in the car, right? Which is also your house, right? So, I mean, there's tons of problems that are going on.
And Nic, in your case, what astounded me was that after you had just done nothing but video on your porch, they took you to the police. It took hours and days. I think they had your wife's debit card or something. I mean, it was really obtrusive, right?
Yeah, they had me in the back of the police paddy wagon for about an hour and a half to 2 hours before they took me to booking. And booking's only maybe a 9-minute tops drive. And like from where I live, I live maybe 2 minutes from a highway entrance, and the jailhouse is right off of the highway entrance. My wife had to fight with them for at least 2 days after I was booked into the system. So roughly 7 days after I was booked in, she got her card back. And we had to pay a late fee on rent for her not having the bank card to pull rent out. Had to buy the new $400 phone again. Going from the time of the incident until the time that the case was dismissed, all the money spent on gas in the car. Like, yeah, it's been really invasive. Dealing with going back and forth to try and support the kids and missing out on that, and not being able to make it to doctor's appointments because if I don't go to the doctor's appointment, or if I don't go to court, I go to jail. If I don't go to the doctor's appointment, I end up sick. So I go to court sick to stay out of jail. And to quote Otto earlier, like he said, it's everywhere. It's not just in the small places, it's everywhere. The police don't care about anything. They don't care about your property. They don't care about anything that you have. To quote the RV thing, God forbid you have an RV on your property. They do the same thing. My cousin, he lives down the road from me. He has a big a big plot of land, 3 acres of land. He has an RV on it. The police go out there in the middle of his land and check it daily, seeing if there's somebody in it. So it's
incredible.
Taya, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's just incredible to me that they would inspect this person's, it's all go onto his property and inspect his RV daily. That to me is so intrusive and so horrifying. And I think you said something that's really important, that there's people out there who are backing the blue until it happens to you.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important, because there are so many people that have reached out to me and said, I've had this incident of police misconduct or police brutality, and I have always respected law enforcement. I've always supported our police, but then something bad happened to me. And there are just so many people out there who don't realize the misconduct and the abuse of power that American law enforcement engages with on a daily basis. They don't realize it when it happens to someone else. They refuse to believe it when they see it on film. They won't believe it until it happens to them. And unfortunately, over-policing and aggressive policing has been continuing in our country. Something that really shocked me was that as a city girl, I didn't realize that people in rural areas had trouble with police the same way we did. In the past 20 years, the level of incarceration in rural America has gone up by 222%. There's actually, incarceration is dropping in cities while it is increasing in rural America. So unfortunately, more and more people are going to have this experience for themselves. And I'm hoping that auditors and cop watchers are the beginning of a movement to hold law enforcement accountable, that this sort of form of citizen journalists where we're all reaching out to each other is a form of revolution, in a sense, and a form of holding law enforcement accountable, that eventually all of us are going to ask for change.
Well, Taya, what while we wrap up this segment, I would urge everyone to go to Otto's channel and watch his. I don't know if you would describe it as a cow.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of his videos. They're pretty nice.
He bows down in front of a police. And what's interesting about it, because I've seen a lot of encounters with auditors, but this one, the cop seemed completely confused. Which, because Otto was bowing down in front of him, and unfortunately, I don't think I gave this clip. I might have given this clip to Friends and Code. But the cop just seemed utterly stunned, like he didn't know what to do. They were kind of looking at each other. Yeah, and so I would urge everyone. I did not give that clip to Friends and Code, so I apologize. But go to Otto's channel and watch it. But we have to move on. Both of you guys, we really appreciate it.
Can I give one piece of advice?
Yeah.
Do not try to call the police on the police while they're trying to arrest you. You will catch charges.
That is such a good point. That is something that he got to experience firsthand. His family got to experience firsthand. So thank you for giving out that piece of advice.
Because we got to move on to our next segment, which of course relates back to exactly what happened to Otto and Nic Pettit. Thank you for joining us, which is the monetization of law enforcement. Because a lot of what we're talking about, when we're talking about the auditing and these strange and bizarre arrests, has to do with money. Because money is what drives the system and the political economy. We were talking about the trial of Derek Chauvin, over the death of George Floyd. And we're saying, hey, they're spending all this money. What are they spending it for? Well, it's because policing generates a tremendous amount of cash. That cash goes back into lawyers and politicians' pockets, and it creates a political economy. And that's why you see these bizarre arrests, because these cops are getting paid $70,000, $80,000 a year in small rural communities, and they have to generate some activity. So people like Otto or Nick are perfect targets for them to really make their bones and actually say, hey, I'm worth the $80,000 a year you have, right, Taya?
Absolutely. And I just want to check, are we going to be speaking with Laura Shark and Tom Zebra now? And then we're going to bring in Jennifer Flemming, correct?
Yep. We're going to speak to Laura and Tom right now.
Okay. So we have Tom Zebra and hopefully Laura Shark.
Wow.
They're cop watchers from the West Coast. And I believe Tom Zebra is known as one of the OG cop watchers. He's been doing this for well over a decade, and we're very happy to have him with us. And we also have Laura Shark, who I had an opportunity to interview before. I'm really glad to see you again, Laura. Thank you for being here.
And Laura had that great video of the cop taking the money from that woman that he was arrested.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, Laura did an amazing job catching some sex workers who were being arrested, and you literally got to see the officers going into her pockets to take the money. And as we know, there are many occasions where that money never makes it into evidence. So, Laura, thank you for being here. And so tell us a little bit about the work that you do. Tell us a little bit about cop watching and why you focused on it. Because as we've noted, there are people that have done cop watching, and it has, led to arrest, led to jail time, led to court costs for them, financial burdens. So tell us a little bit about why you cop watch, why it's important to you.
I don't know why. Why do I do it? No, it's fine. Well, I mean, I don't have a horror story, if that's what you mean. Like, I don't. I'm sorry, I'm trying to adjust this thing, but yeah, I don't have a horror story. I mean, I don't have the most interesting of tales about it. As much as I literally met Tom Zebra at random, and he invited me to go with him, and I thought to myself that I wanted to be confident. You know, if I had a police interaction. And I kind of just got stuck into it because I saw, you know, just the little things that happen on a minor traffic stop, and figure, I don't know, and it just piqued my interest, and I saw, you know, like the little things that were going on, and I felt like I had somewhat of a platform, and I just want to educate people on the rights.
Well, I think that's a very noble sentiment. You don't have to have a horror story. I just wanted to be able to share why it was important to you. So you wanted to be able to educate people and inform people of their rights as well as be secure in your own, correct? Is that a good way to describe it? Okay, I just want to make sure I understood well. Tom Zebra, thank you so much for being here. I'm glad to have the chance to speak with you.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So you have been cop watching for years. I think well over a decade. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've been close to 2. Actually, yeah, 2 decades.
2 decades cop watching. So tell us a little bit about why you have taken this on. Why do you do cop watching? Why is it important to you to film the police?
Really, the police didn't give me any choice. You know, it wasn't something that I necessarily wanted to do at first. But I felt that, you know, I had to protect myself. And by the time, you know, it doesn't take long recording the police before they'll pretty much destroy things in your life. Some of the people that were speaking earlier were discussing some of these things, how they don't care about your rights, your or the law, whatever it is. So by the time they started respecting my rights, by that point, I was so into recording the police that, you know, that I just continued, but recording other people, try to protect other people's rights as well.
But Tom, so, you know, how has your relationship changed with the police over time? I mean, sometimes I watch your videos, it seems like they all kind of know you, and, you know.
It's from week to week, even day to day. It changes every day. Every time I think that my relationship with the police is solid, you know, there's always one more police officer that's going to act like a fool or just, you know, disregard the law or my rights. And when that happens, his department and everybody that works with him, instead of you know, correcting the officer, they'll all stand behind and defend that officer. So I'd like to say my relationship with them is good, but there's constant setbacks. And yeah.
And Laura, I mean, when people talk about like journalism, Laura, do you think of yourself as a journalist in the traditional sense, or in the new sense, or like a citizen journalist? I mean, I know it's a fraught question, but well, go ahead. What were you saying?
Well, I mean, I guess I didn't at first, but like, yeah, like a video journalist. I mean, I document situations as they happen and share them. I mean, I've been, you know, kind of talked down to from administrations, from the police departments, when they want my credentials as a journalist or something, and I don't have the credentials that they want, and I'm like, well, okay, how about First Amendment? I'm an American citizen. I mean, I don't know what they expect when I want information on an incident that I witnessed. You know. I mean, but anyway,
you guys do everything that, you know. I'm from a more traditional, you know, journalist, but you guys do everything that journalists do. You know, getting the details, you know, documenting what happens, writing the first draft of history. But also, what's different about you is that you're not attached to some organization that has a stake in the game of the political economy of policing, and that's what makes your work so distinct. Because most of us, when any of us who've worked in mainstream media, knows that you go in there and they're like, "Oh yeah, we have our cop show tonight," and I'm like, "What is that?" And they're like, "Yeah, we go around with the cops where they arrest people," you know. And I worked at a television station that literally had a show with police, and so I think it's very, you know, I think people need to appreciate the fact that you guys are truly objective,
doing the dirty work.
If I can add something, if I can help answer that question.
Yes.
The mainstream media, in my opinion, is, they're willing to tell the police story whatever way the police want it told, and they knowingly, they tell things that aren't true, and they don't tell the important details that need to be told to try to protect the police. And that's going back to the previous question that you asked me. That's a huge part also of why we do what we do, because if we don't actually get out there and see something and record something and share those details are never told. And even when we do share the details that we see, they still mostly are never told because we have a limited audience. And I think in general, probably mainstream or most of the public, they might not even believe the things that we have to say or show, or the things that, that we've documented. So
that's a really good point. And Laura, I saw something very interesting that you did. I know one of the first videos that I saw that you did was the aftermath of a brutal beating of a young man, and you captured not only the incredible just brutality that this young man suffered, but you also focused on blood on the officer's shirts. And I think you even were asked to go speak to internal affairs in relation to this case.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what that process was like?
Well, Daniel and I both did it. But I was the one that had the first contact. And you know what? I was asked recently how they made that contact, and I forget how, or if they watched my video. I'm not even sure how they were alerted to it, to be honest with you. But we communicated back and forth for a while, like over almost a month, because at first I'm like, yes, but then I'm like, no, because I was kind of like, well, what protections are you going to offer me or whatever? Because like, they're not like, I haven't been retaliated against yet. And when I say yet, obviously it's a possibility. She said she'd have no protections. And I was kind of like, I don't know if I want to do that if it don't matter. But then I'm like, you know what, screw it. Like, I'll do it because I want to know, like, for any other person, because a lot of people be too afraid, I kind of think it won't go anywhere. Like, whatever I said might not matter one way or another, but I wanted to see the process of it, so, and then, so we went to the building, their IA headquarters, and had a sit-down meeting, just me and two other deputies or detectives or whatever. And I mean, it was pretty simple. I mean, it was kind of like the questions that they would ask were like really so if I'm here and you're there, because I obviously didn't have a measuring tape when I was recording, so I don't know, I didn't know the distance specifically, but all in all, like, I guess I just was absorbing the experience of talking to IA, I guess. But I really don't know, because they won't tell you anything. They'll tell you, like, we can't tell you how the case ends, begins, where it's going, blah 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 blah. I still don't even know that man's name that they beat to this day. So, there's that. So, I mean,
that is not unusual. That is not unusual that IA would just, a lot of cities and states have regulations that you can't know anything about the personnel file of a cop, which is extraordinary because our information gets put out there quite consistently, but that's something that's problematic. But I also remember, Tom, a really interesting encounter you had where you were asking for a complaint form and a police officer brought out a yellow legal pad.
It was absurd.
That was absurd.
That's, I mean, besides, that's not my rule. That's their rule, that they're supposed to have a form with instructions and stuff. So obviously a piece of paper doesn't really meet those requirements.
Mm-hmm.
But worse than that, I've been arrested, they charged me with felonies one time trying to get a complaint form. When they found out I was recording the conversation, they charged me with felonies for that. So despite the one with the yellow legal pad,
Yeah. So what kind of felonies? What was the pretense for the charges? How did they charge you? What happened?
The city of Hawthorne, this might have been back in probably 2003 or 4. I don't remember the exact year, but they charged me with 2 felonies for eavesdropping, for trying to get a complaint form, and for recording the conversation that the lieutenant was actually recording himself. So you can record the police obviously anyways, anytime when they're working. So it could have never been eavesdropping, But the fact that he was secretly recording me and tried to charge me with felonies is just ridiculous. That's kind of like what the gentleman said earlier in the show, where they just do not care about right and wrong, and they do this stuff intentionally because, you know, they have nothing to lose. And when they put fake charges on us that we're not even suspected of committing, it has a way of destroying our lives and quickly. And that's basically the point, is they're not going to, you know, if we're going to be doing this kind of work, they're going to be making it very difficult for us.
That's a really important point that you made, Tom. And I think it's important also that you shared how law enforcement can make this work exceptionally difficult. I was wondering, and either you or Laura can address this question, how much you think profit is a motive in law enforcement? Like, for example, in our city of Baltimore, it is a $500 million business, and that officers get incredible pensions and perks and benefits that us regular folks could only dream of. And of course, if they file overtime, they get money, they get vacation days, they get slash days, and they're rewarded in so many ways for essentially, in many cases, terrorizing the public. So how much do you think like the profit motive is influencing how law enforcement works and how it interacts with the public?
I'll go first, if you don't mind. I would say it's mostly, I would say the police are 100% motivated by profit. I don't want to pretend like there's no good police, because I know a lot of police that I feel like they do a great job, but they're by far outnumbered, and they're definitely there for the money. And the numbers I heard you guys say earlier, I think you mentioned $70,000 or $80,000. The police in my neighborhood, they make hundreds of thousands a year per officer. You know, they're like, say, San Jose, for example. The police over there are making $500,000. This is just a police officer, yearly pay and benefits. So, and that makes a huge, just the fact that they make so much more than the people that are policing is probably part of why they look at these people like they mean nothing, because the pay rate is just, it's ridiculous. Most people in this country wouldn't even believe the figures. If they seen them, they would think they're false. But yes, it's a huge motive, is the pay and the lack of consequences. It's just that alone is going to create, eventually that's going to create an awful person, to overpay them, to treat them like they're so special, and to teach them that the other people don't matter and you could just squash them in their rights. How are the police supposed to have respect for us, you know, in that kind of an environment?
You know, Tom, that is such a good point, that the culture of policing can actually corrupt a police officer, that there's a culture there where law enforcement is essentially told to look at the public. It's an us versus them kind of attitude. And like you said, officers are given a level of respect. They're in our productions. They're treated like heroes. How many cop movies are there where there's one rogue cop who has to break the law to make a difference? This one rogue cop can only save us all if he stamps on everyone else's constitutional rights. How many movies are there like that? That propaganda is absolutely, you know, we're inundated with it from the first day we turn on a TV or walk into a movie theater. Laura, like I said, I mentioned a video that you had where you literally saw cops taking money from a sex worker working on the street. How do you think profit has, let's say, essentially like infected the process of law enforcement?
I think Daniel pretty much covered, you know, how this covered that part pretty well.
Well,
I
yeah,
mean, it's obvious.
He did answer excellently.
It's also it's not just the police on the streets, but you know, the judges, they have a huge incentive to keep things the way they are, because if they were to make decisions that are in our best interest, that would be against their financial interest and their future. And even let's say criminal defense attorneys, they too, you know, they're in on this game too. You know, they're selling services maybe for a pre-trial motion that they know they have no chance of winning, even though in theory their client should win. They know the judges are not going to suppress evidence that was wrongfully obtained. But they're not going to ever tell a client. They're going to charge the client $10,000 and act like, okay, you know, we're going to give it a shot. We're going to try to defend your constitutional rights because they were violated. But they know damn well that they're not going to win this suppression hearing. And they know they've never won a suppression hearing in their whole career, but they still spend their whole career selling services for something that's a fairy tale. So it's completely profit. It's about extracting money from the people, and usually the people that have the least amount of money to take in the first place.
That's a really good point, Tom, because it really is, you know, in Baltimore and any place where the most over policing you see is the poorer the community, more police it is. It's just disproportionate. And you know, certainly when they did a Department of Justice investigation in Baltimore City, it was 2 of the poorest neighbors of the city that were subject to the most illegal arrests. So it's really, you know, a way of enforcing inequality, really, you know, a way of funneling money out of cities and out of communities and, you know, into the pockets of cops, and cops can retire when they're 48 and, you know, draw a salary for 30 years. So, you know, it's profound. And, you know, I just don't know how we fix it, I guess would be the question.
You know, Friends in Code, I think we have a video from Laura Shark that maybe we could run to share with our viewers to get an idea of some of the cop watching that she does, some of her work.
Is this a public sidewalk? I'm asking you, is this a public sidewalk?
It's a public sidewalk.
Right.
But we got a medical issue. I don't need you recording us or anything behind it. You understand that?
There's such a great moment there where she says, "I'm on a public sidewalk," right? I mean, that's at the heart of cop watching. That's at the heart of filming the police. And it seems to me that you are put in the position of educating officers on how the Constitution works. I mean,
you think you wouldn't have to do that. I honestly don't think that they know the law at all. That's not part of the, you know, curriculum for they don't have any obligation to know the law. So I mean, sometimes it's probably shocking to them for anybody to have any intelligence, I guess. I don't know, but yeah, he didn't seem to understand what I was saying. So, but that's why my point is to educate the public, because the cops are kind of a lost cause when it comes to educating.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's amazing. I think anyone, until you've had a camera out on the sidewalk, doesn't understand how much you attract. Like, how many times I've been asked by a cop to move off a sidewalk. What am I doing? Like, as if he has any right to ask me what I'm doing with a camera on a sidewalk or in a public park, or, you know, all sorts of stuff. And it's really, 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 really like, it's much worse than people think. If you put a camera up on a sidewalk, be prepared to have some sort of police officer or somebody come up to you and ask you what you're doing.
As a matter of fact, something that was interesting, there's a retired police officer who Stephen and I have used as a source, and he used to teach at the police academy here in Maryland. And he actually admitted to us that many of the cops that he came in to teach had no understanding of the Constitution, no basic understanding of civil liberties. And we spoke to a young person who was supposed to be participating in youth sensitivity training with the police officers. And he said he came into the room and looked at the chalkboard, and it said, "The Fourth Amendment doesn't apply to us." And a police officer had written that on the chalkboard. So just to let you know, even retired police officers and young people who are going in to try to help the police understand how to interact with communities, there's definitely a strain of police officer who is, let's say, intransigent and not open to respecting the public and to honoring the Constitution. And it starts even before they get out of the academy.
So how long are you guys going to keep at this? I mean, do you want to keep doing this? I mean, I know it's taken a toll on you, Tom. I remember the interview we had with you. I was very moved by how it affected you. Are you going to keep going?
Yeah, I don't really feel like I have any choice. I've invested, you know, too much time to give up. I mean, I don't know that I'm never going to succeed. It's not like I'll ever be able to finish and set my tools down and walk away knowing that I've completed the job. I'm not even sure that that we're moving in the right direction. So for sure, this is something I'll be doing as long as I'm able, as long as I'm able and mobile. This is definitely what I'll be doing.
Well, as a former member of the mainstream media, I both respect very much what you do, because I know covering cops is a very dangerous and, can be very personal, take a toll on you. And I have a lot of respect for you guys, because, I know it's hard doing it when you have, a place to go with people who supposedly will back you up a little bit. You guys are out there on your own, and that is very admirable. And you're taking on one of the most, powerful institutions there is. So
yes,
I have a lot of respect for what you guys do.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I appreciate, I'm sorry for interrupting. I appreciate you guys even having us on and talking to us, because, this is something we've spent years doing, and there's no mainstream media, even when they know this, they know the story, they know what's happening. They're never going to have us on and tell our story and display the police in a truthful manner. That's my opinion. So my point in saying that is I appreciate you guys taking the time and even expressing, these points that you're making. That's huge for me. I just wanted to say thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I mean,
Thank you, Tom. We appreciate you both. And I just want to say your point about the mainstream media, that's one of the reasons why this movement of cop watchers has been so fascinating to me, because one thing I noticed is that the mainstream media has completely gone out of its way to ignore that this is happening. I cannot believe that mainstream media outlets have gone so out of their way to turn a blind eye to what is essentially almost like a democratic revolution. People here are taking into their own hands the right to film police, the right to hold government accountable, the right to hold power accountable, and to demand transparency. And they're doing that, and you're doing that work. And it's so important. And I just don't, I have some theories about why mainstream media is going out its way to ignore cop watchers and auditors. But I'm absolutely so glad that I've had the opportunity to meet people like you and to learn from people like you, because you're doing an important service for your communities.
Absolutely. So thank you.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you for coming on
Thanks
today,
for
because we
having me.
appreciate it. Hopefully come back.
Definitely.
Great. And, stick around if you want, or comments or whatever. We're going to move into, I think we have Rights Krispy now, right? And
That we're going to have Rights Krispy and Noli D. And we have to have Noli D, because if it wasn't for Noli D, I would maybe not know about this incredible cop watcher and auditor movement. So I'm so happy to have her join us, because she's introduced me to so many of the people that we've had the opportunity to speak with tonight. And also Rights Krispy. Hello, Rights Krispy. This is my first time meeting you.
Yeah, this is our first time meeting.
Thank you.
Really
It's an honor.
appreciate it.
So you know what? I have a video that Friends and Code might throw up on the screen for us, so we can get a look at some of Rights Krispy's work. Friends and Code, do you have that for me?
Can I get your name and badge number?
Well, when we get done, I'll give it to you. No problem.
I'm just taking pictures.
You have a license with you?
Why would you want that?
Oh, it's not right ID out here on a call, man.
Did I commit a crime? Did I commit a crime?
Say you did.
Then why would you want my ID? How are you today?
Do you have permission to be on this property?
Can I get your name and badge
No,
number?
you can't. I need your ID, please.
Did I
Do you have
commit
your
a
ID?
crime?
Do you have your ID? I need to see your ID. Are you refusing
Did I
to
commit
ID
a crime?
yourself?
Did I commit a crime?
You're failing to ID
Did
yourself.
I commit a crime?
You are failing to ID yourself.
Did I commit a crime?
I'm going to go ahead and detain you for right now, please. Okay? You're failing to identify yourself.
It is really
Wow.
interesting and disturbing. Do I call you Rights Krispy, or is you have a name?
You call me Finn.
Finn? Finn,
Yeah.
what's fascinating to me is this, and this comes up a lot in auditing, is how the thought that the cops feel they have the right to demand your identification in any context. Can you talk a little about that and how you feel about that? Because it certainly isn't constitutional, but it comes up a lot, and that your video demonstrates that. Why is that so important?
Yeah, well, it's our Fourth Amendment right to be secure in our papers, our person, our effects. But, when I started doing this, I was really cautious about, making sure that I've got a German server to hide my email when I asked for public records requests to be sent to me. But at this point, it's like everybody already knows my real name, so there's no sense in hiding it. And I really don't try to make that
a big issue anymore in our audits, which we were talking about auditors, and what we call ourselves. Blind Justice, doesn't call himself. I like to say gonzo journalist. And I take you guys as lead. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to follow up all these people. Friends in Code's doing a great job. Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Irate. Thank you, Blind Justice. Eric is my number one hero. He even mentioned the color fuchsia, which is one of the Krispy colors, fuchsia and teal. But Otto Watchdog too. I mean, but Taya and Steven, thank you very much for all you do. You're setting the bar so high. I try to keep up with you in journalism, and you guys are a shining example. And that's what I'm saying. We are not here to create a disturbance. We're here to create an opportunity to. Sometimes we become part of the story. The opportunity is on the subjects of our government, whether it's cops or people in a city hall, to shine or show us that they don't belong there, taking our money to treat us poorly.
Yeah, and I think I appreciate you saying that. And I think one of the things that's really important that people don't understand is that if the right to not ID yourself slips away, there are a whole range of things that we would lose control over. And it seems like so, why not give the cop your ID? But from that comes so much power. And I respect the way auditors bring that up in a way that's completely like, hey, we're going to show you why this is important. And so much of the police power, the random police power that infiltrates their lives comes from ID, from things like disorderly conduct, where police have this subjective ability to rule the space that we're in. As a journalist, we're constantly fighting with police for information, with the right to report. There's a shield law for journalists, and I've been caught up in stuff before. So even though that seems like sort of incidental, that that Blind Justice did, that you did, where you're saying, hey, I'm not going to just ID myself for random, is extremely important. And the fact that you guys bring it up in ways that we can't, I have a lot of respect, and I am happy you do it, because I think Americans have to understand how important that is to maintaining some sort of balance of power between police and the government and us.
Yes, and again, the moniker of gonzo journalist is not just because I really enjoy that genre. It's also because it protects me. I'm a journalist. If I just say auditor or constitutionalist, constitutionalists are on a watch list now. And Taya, what you said about not just the mainstream media is ignoring things. They're not just ignoring it; they're promoting, like, not just mainstream media, but also TV, all kinds of pop culture. It's about cop shows where the cop is the moral superior to a criminal and vicious society that is in danger. And people watch that, and a lot of people feel empathy for these guys who are abusing their power every day in a majority, the minority of good cops. And I do believe they exist, even though they're doing a job that a corrupt system is making them do. They're still good people that don't like what's going on around them. I'm message to you. I'm tired of doing your job. You got to stand up. You got to forget the being afraid. I'm not afraid. I got to keep doing this, and it's doing it for you, for my kids to look at you with respect instead of fear.
Now,
85%. That's a big number. What you were saying, 85%. So those good cops are committing that 85% of useless stops. Right. You know why that number is true, and that's shocking, but it's true. My first time cop watching, I went out with Lightning Dave, and on my way back home, I just happened on an organic stop, and this cop who happens to have a YouTube channel had a girl stopped, and they were searching her trunk and her car, and I rolled up, and he's like, "Oh, hey, what are you doing? You have a YouTube channel?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, me too." I finally found it later on. But I said, "Why'd you pull her over?" He said, "She had a headlight out." Well, both her headlights were working. And why does having a headlight out? He said, "We were warning her and letting her know." So I'm thinking, warning her, not to step out of line, letting her know who's boss. Why are you searching her car? That Fourth Amendment right protects us against unlawful searches. They had no reason to search her.
He never filed a report on that. I went back and checked on it. He covered that up because he got caught red-handed. And there was no headlight out, by the way.
Wow.
That's
So
powerful.
Noli, you know, we appreciate you coming. You know, obviously you're the reason the police accountability report exists, right?
Well, he's the reason why Police Accountability Report has
You know,
been
one thing
fortunate
that was
enough to have some of the
interesting-
best we've had and some of the wonderful cop watchers.
Yeah, you know, now this is something interesting I didn't know about because I'm always learning new things about auditing. You're called a moderator, is that correct? Or can you talk a little bit about that? Because there's just things I'm learning every day from the whole auditing community. And what does that mean? Is that true or is that?
Well, yeah, we're called monitors, and what we do is whenever there's any trouble that goes down, we will make contact with that police department, or we will give out the phone number to that police department, and everybody in the chat, not everybody, but several people in the chat will pick up their phones and they will call. And they will say, hey, this is going on and we don't like it. We can see what this cop is doing and it's wrong.
That's how I started.
Yeah, another thing that we do is, of course, we moderate the chat itself. So if there's any horrible statements, threats or anything like that, we can get rid of them. We can time them out or block them. I don't block people. I don't believe in it. But I will time you out if you're going too far. And I'll do it over and over and over again if I have to. But we're there basically as the first line of support for the cop watcher or for the auditor, so that when they start to get into a hairy situation, we can help them out of it.
So how have you seen, the whole community evolve over how long have you been doing this? Like, how long have you been monitoring or been involved in this community?
5 years now.
How has it changed? I mean, what has changed in it over the past 5 years?
Well, in the beginning, I honestly feel like it was just a handful of people who were really about.
The numbers have changed.
The numbers have
They have to keep increasing. Everybody get out there. They can't arrest us all for exercising our First Amendment right, our freedom of the press to all be journalists and put the truth out. In this information age, we have to get the truth out. It's not a bunch of great guys doing heroic work out there. It's a bunch of people giving you a $116 ticket for your car not being in the exact shape it was in when you drove it off the lot.
Right. And I mean, there have been other evolutions of technology, but really the tradition of American journalism is citizen journalists with a, printing press or whatever, and printing their own pamphlets or whatever, starting their own publications. This is very much, to me, the auditor movement is very much in line with the traditions of American journalists being a citizen grassroots occupation, not, the purview of huge corporations or some of the.
Or the purview of elites, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I like writes Krispy or Finn. I like what you're saying, about, hey, we all got to pick up a camera and be journalists.
Well, think about it pragmatically. Think about what happened. Why do we always say, 9/11, it's not really like, what's the difference between a cow and 9/11? You can't milk a cow for 20 years. And seriously, that's something, no disrespect to the victims of that, but they're being exploited to put these people up on a pedestal, and not just these people as cops. The government has been spying on you. The Patriot Act, they took more than a mile already. So they're watching us all over, and they're getting away with it for a decade, and then a decade they get brought up to Congress. Oh, this is what you did. Slap on the wrist, keep doing it. And what do we have to do? We have to do the same. We have to keep an eye on them like they're keeping an eye on us.
Yeah, exactly.
They can look at me and see. We can be examples or we can be warnings.
Yeah.
Try to be an example.
Right.
Who watches the watchers?
So
That's
Noli,
an excellent question.
how many cop watchers, how many auditors do you think there are? Like, I mean, you have probably one of the best connected people we know in the community. Do you have any idea of how many people are out there every day turning their cameras around on the government, as Finn points out, that like to monitor us, but we're now monitoring them? I mean, how many people do you think are doing this? Do you have any idea?
I have over 1,500
wow.
either cop watchers or auditors or activists that are just in my feed alone. And I know that there's more that I'm not subscribed to or that I'm not actively in contact with or helping. But it's because mainly either I don't agree with something that they're doing to the point where I just can't support them, or it's they have so much support already, they don't need me. And so I try to stick with the people who need the help.
And yeah, we have brand new people starting to do this every day. Like, shout out to Cookie Groover. She went out just yesterday for her first time, even though I've been begging her to do this for 2 years, because she has a Southern accent. And that's what we need. You know, that's the lady that you know, people who watch Fox News want to watch too. You know what I mean? We get everybody to watch her. And she was watching it. She was watching Stop, and she saw an illegal search going on, another violation of the Fourth Amendment. And I was on the phone with her because she was recording, but she was also she has 2 devices. And I told her, hey, you can't. What Nick was probably charged with, interference, is just because you're talking to people, they can charge you with that. I told her, don't talk to them. Say very loudly to me, hey, that looks like an illegal search that guy can stop at any moment.
Oh, that's good advice.
Clever.
So the cop came up to her afterwards saying, hey, what you did was a crime. What? No, what you did was a crime. You were eavesdropping. I was talking to my friend on the phone.
Oh, nice.
She is a firecracker. And I'm so proud to.
That's
to have
amazing,
that.
because that could have easily turned into a situation that we call contempt of cop. That's
Right.
that's one of the ways they turn it around on you. But Noli, I have to also highlight moderators again, because not only do they make sure that the chat is, let's say, courteous, not only do they make sure that there's networking, but I know that you put out phone numbers so that police officers can be called, that people can make records requests. I know that sometimes you help organize people get bail when a cop watcher ends up in jail. I mean, you're part of an important movement to help support our citizen journalists. Don't you think that kind of work is really essential to supporting them? I do.
Yeah, it really is. Like Blind Justice just said, we helped Miss Justice find him when he got arrested.
Terrific.
We pull together, and if somebody doesn't have bail funds set up already, we will $2 at a time get that bail money and get them out, because when they're in there, I mean, they get abused pretty bad. And they get neglected. And look at all the people who have died in custody for reasons that are always unknown. When you look at the coroner's report, the cause of death is unknown. You have no idea how many of those I've seen come out of prisons and out of jails. Way too many. Way too many. So we don't like our people staying in jail very long. We have one man who is in jail right now on $1 million bail. $1 million.
No,
For filming the police.
You are so right, because when I was a reporter covering jails and covering cops for a newspaper, it was like every other day someone would die in jail, and it was always undetermined. He went in jail and he died. We're not going to explain it. Jail is extremely dangerous. And then during
The Eighth Amendment abuses,
yeah, it is not. People die in there every day for reasons that are never sorted out. So that's a really good point. But we got to move along, because we are way behind schedule.
We are way behind schedule.
Thank you so much for being patient, and thank you for sharing your stories, and thank you for what you do. And we really appreciate it, because
so much.
This is the first time we've met you, and we're very happy to meet you.
Yes, and we definitely want to have you on the Police Accountability Report.
Yeah, definitely.
Please, I'd be honored, and thank you for having me with such an all-star panel. Thanks to all those people who have blazed trails for all of us. I started off just making those phone calls, seeking redress for our grievances, and then I just had too much every day, and I felt motivated to do this. But thank you for having me on. I'd be delighted to come back anytime.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to have you on. We're really glad we met you, and we appreciate what you do and taking the time to talk to us. And of course, the heart and soul of the Police Accountability Report.
Yes.
Best friend.
Very true. Very true.
So we appreciate you, and we want to bring on we can, Laura, who are we going to bring
Jennifer,
on?
we want to bring on Jennifer Flemming, who
Jennifer
is
Flemming,
another from Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I first just have to let people know that unfortunately, the images that we're going to show are incredibly graphic and incredibly brutal, and it tells the story of what happened to her daughter. Her daughter was was being pulled over by police, and she attempted to evade them. And as she crouched, hiding in fear from the law enforcement officers, they sicked a canine unit on her. And unfortunately, the canine latched onto her daughter and caused severe damages, emotionally and physically traumatizing her daughter. And she's going to need several reconstructive surgeries. So first, we're going to speak to her mother. Then we're going to share some of the images of her daughter before the canine attack. And then we're going to share some of the images afterwards. So Jennifer, so yes, Stephen?
Oh, I was going to say, but the reason we wanted to have Jennifer on is because, again, we wanted to have some guests who were not necessarily auditors, but people who have been fighting battles with police over, misconduct, and to show that there are people suffering from this in ways that, we don't always, don't always understand, because why we do this and why we cover police is partly because of these kind of cases that come up that are so stunning and shocking. So, Jennifer, we want to thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We appreciate it.
So how is your daughter doing now anyway? I mean, just so people know, she was attacked by a canine dog after a chase by police, and she was disfigured. How is she doing?
Physically, she's actually doing a lot better for the most part, except for a minor difference in one of her eyes that still has leakage occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
The reconstructive surgery did an excellent job, and she looks almost exactly like she did before. I have to say almost because, like I said, the one eye is still a little droopy, and it will probably remain that way unless she has another surgery. Mentally and emotionally, I don't think that she's doing so well. She has a distrust for law enforcement, which has leaked into a distrust for her own legal counsel. And so we obviously contacted a civil liberties attorney and filed charges against Allen County Police Department over the attack with the canine dog. She also had a personal injury attorney. She was unwilling to cooperate with her own counsel because she felt like anything that she said to them would be used against her. And so at this point, her personal injury attorney has dropped her. However, the civil liberties attorney is still moving forward with her case. She is currently sitting in jail for not only the case with the dog, but she also got into trouble after that situation and has an additional case. Due to that case, I was a little unsure about coming on and talking about her situation because, she's my daughter. I love her and I don't want to make her look bad. And what she said to me when I asked her about whether or not I should come on, she said, "Mom, I'm a drug addict and I need help. That doesn't mean my face should be chewed off." And so for that reason, I decided that I would go ahead and come on and talk about the situation. But I also have to acknowledge the fact that she does have an issue. She does have a problem. And because of that problem, the police have been able to integrate themselves into her life even further. And she's currently sitting in jail.
Oh God, I'm so sorry. That sort of brings up the problem that I think her case illustrates, which is the war on drugs and the way police get involved with drugs. It just doesn't work, and it's the wrong way to treat this. Correct? I mean, this is a health problem, but it seems like
this is absolutely a health problem.
Well, and it was due to this case that she is finally at a place where she realizes that there is a problem. She's only 19 years old. And so in her mind, she was just having fun and hanging out and doing what her friends are doing. She didn't really even realize that she had an issue. I'm not even 100% certain that she's even fully bought into the fact that she has an issue. I think that she's at this point acknowledging the fact that it's causing an issue in her life.
Right.
And it's allowing her to be targeted in a way that if it wasn't in her life, she wouldn't be able to be targeted.
Exactly.
Of course, she has a mom like me that's like, do you not see that like you have problems that come from drugs, and therefore you have a drug problem because drugs are creating a problem. So I'm helping her to connect the dots. But like for her to tell me, Mom, I have a drug problem, that doesn't mean I'm a throwaway person. That was a huge step for her.
Yeah.
But very traumatizing for me, because while I was in prison for my drug problem, I continuously went to court and said to the court while I was battling for her, my daughter is not a throwaway person. Just because she's a child of the incarcerated doesn't mean that she's a throwaway person. And so to hear her as an adult say that is pretty traumatizing.
Oh, Jennifer, I'm so sorry, but I think what you're doing is so important, helping your daughter connect the dots, helping her understand that this is a health issue, and that what happened to her interaction with law enforcement was so excessive and not her fault. And hopefully this time when you're speaking with her and letting her know that, yes, using drugs is making it easier for law enforcement to target you, that she'll realize that it's time for her to put behind her the fun and games that she was having with her friends and move forward, that she doesn't need to have this in her life anymore. So I wanted to show some of the viewers your daughter before this canine attack. And I just want to show some of these pictures, and it makes me emotional to look at this. The beautiful pictures of your daughter. What a beautiful child she is. And I love this picture because you look like sisters in it. You're both gorgeous women. The daughter's on the right, mom's on the left, if anyone couldn't tell which one was which. So just, fun, happy, healthy little girl who's beautiful, obviously has a sense of humor. And look at that. Look at that. She's having fun, beautiful colors in her hair, beautiful makeup. And I think now, just to let you know, we're going to share the pictures of what she looked like in the hospital after the dog attack. So like I said, these pictures are very graphic, very brutal. And I'm just warning the audience that this can be very upsetting. Friends and Code, can you share those pictures of the aftermath of the dog attack after she was pulled over and the police? Yes, thank you. This is her daughter, Trinity, 19 years old, in the hospital after the canine dogs were sicked on her. The dog, I believe, clamped on the side of her face so hard that it actually punctured the skull. It actually cracked bones in her skull. And that you were told that she was going to need several reconstructive surgeries. You said she's healing well now?
She is. We went back and forth to the plastic surgeons several times. They had impacted all in her nose. They had to completely reconstruct her nose. And so she had to go have the stabilizers from her nose removed at one point in time. And then she had stitches in both of her eyes where the dog had actually latched on to her eye. The one eye that it had punctured, and they didn't know she would get her sight back, but she is getting her sight back. She is currently and has been having some nerve issues where like she can't feel parts of her face, but because of the fact that seems to kind of come and go, they think that will over time repair itself. And then from her ear all the way down to the back of her head, she had 45 staples in her head where the dog had latched onto her skull and it had crushed part of her skull. She said that when that happened, that she actually thought she was going to die. She said, at that point, Mom, when I heard my skull crack, she said she went limp because she thought, well, this is it. This is where I die. This is how it happens.
This is just such a terrifying and traumatizing event to happen to anyone, especially to a young girl.
We had asked police about how they justify this use of force, and what and we never got an answer. Have they ever?
They have never addressed the situation ever. There has never been an apology. There has never been an explanation. There has never been any comment at all. As far as I know, there has never been an investigation on the police officer or the dog that were involved in this situation. They both are still in active duty. The dog is still out there being used as a weapon against our citizens. I don't believe that there has ever been any accountability for where the dog was trained and what type of process the dog went through in order to be trained. And like currently, while she's sitting in jail on those charges, the judge at one point in time has fired her court-appointed attorney. He had brought her a plea bargain for probation. And for whatever reason, the judge felt that it was necessary to fire that attorney. They appointed another attorney. From my understanding, that attorney has already quit her case. And somehow they brought her a plea bargain with no attorney that is for 4.5 years probation. And they're trying to get her to plead guilty for that case to resisting law enforcement. Even though she was hiding in a bush. And as soon as they approached her, she said, I surrender, get the dog, get the dog.
So what do you want to see happen? I mean, you said there might have been a lawsuit, but what do you want for your daughter and for the police to do going forward as we kind of wrap up?
Especially in the nature of the person who was responsible for that dog, the person who handled that dog. What do you want to see happen there?
I really think that individual, because he continued to antagonize the dog after the dog was attacking, I feel like he should no longer handle canines. And I also feel like the dog should be removed from the police force because that dog went straight for her face and her neck. It was going for a kill shot. It did not go for any limbs. There was not a mark anywhere on her body but her face and her head. And therefore, that dog has been weaponized and I don't think should be allowed to be used in service any longer. And I've also been working with a bill writer to try to get some legislation passed that would call for stricter regulations on how police dogs are trained and when they're allowed to be used.
Well, Jennifer, we really appreciate your courage of coming forward and discussing this extremely painful topic with us and coming on our show too, because it really shocked the conscience, and I think people need to see these things, as painful as they are, and also your honesty about your daughter's situation also exposes it. Police are not the right solution for your daughter's health or well-being.
Right. And it just shows that the war on drugs is honestly, and someone mentioned this in the comments, that the war on drugs is a war on people. That when we use drugs, when we end up abusing the substances, we need help. We need medical attention. We need medical care. We don't need threats. We don't need guns. We don't need law enforcement. And we certainly don't need canine. And I guess, Jennifer, law enforcement now has become a focus in your life, probably in a way it never had been before. And I'm sure you've seen the protests across the country, other people who've experienced police brutality and excessive force. Has this changed the way you see law enforcement? Do you feel now like that you have to become more active, that you have to speak out, or do you want to see massive reform? How has this changed things for you?
So, because of my own situation, I was aware of corruption within the system. With the fact that more of a spotlight is being put upon it at this point in time, it, number one, for me, that I'm not crazy, because when you go through that kind of thing, you tend to think that this doesn't happen in real life. This is like a Lifetime show. So it just confirms to me that there is a bigger issue, and that issue is far greater than myself. And it does make me want to speak out more. It does make me want to do something and to be more of an activist to evoke change. It definitely makes me feel like I have a responsibility to the rest of the citizens of the United States to be a voice. Yes. Because honestly, my daughter's not going to be a voice for herself. She's not going to speak up for herself. So somebody has to stand in that gap, and somebody has to speak up.
Great. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us and talking about your daughter. And
being so honest and forthright about your own experience. And I can't we've spoken to each other on and off via Facebook, and as I've said before, I can't imagine how painful this is for you to see this happen to your daughter, to want to make it right, to want to fix things for her. And I just hope that you can let Trinity know that we support her, and that we absolutely want the 100% the best for her, and that we hope she gets justice. That's what we want for her. We hope she gets justice, and we hope that there's some true accountability and discipline for the police officers who were involved in this. That's absolutely her right to have that. That's absolutely her right to ask for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining us.
I think this is good because it really pivots to our final topic of the show, which is reform, because no case points to need for reform more than what we've just witnessed. I mean, Taya, you and I spent quite a bit of time trying to get answers out of the police department there, and got none. And especially when it comes to how and why they justified the use of force with this dog. And I think it points to the fact that police, for example, the use of force procedures are pretty different. I mean, even though it's this vague sense of reasonable, right? Every department has its own sort of use of force,
yes, they do.
Sort of matrix or whatever. And that, I don't think that's a good thing, because we see these uneven applications and these unjust applications of force. So I think to finish this off, right, who are we going to have? We're going to have,
I think
Eric, right?
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
We can have Eric come back in, and I just want Jennifer to know that the people in the chat very much want to be able to be assistants, very much want to be able to be a help to you. So I'm going to reach out to you to make sure that if they want to help you, if they want to support you in Trinity, that they have a way to reach out to you. I think that's very important, that to let you know that the viewers who are watching were very much moved by the story that you shared about your daughter, and that they want to offer their support.
So just to wrap it up, because we've been going now for almost
for an hour and a half.
No, 2 hours.
2 hours. Oh my.
Yeah, we're an hour past the time. So we're gonna wrap this up because we appreciate everybody being so patient. We appreciate all the guests that have joined us and have stuck around, and really, and including Eric and Otto and Blind Justice and everybody, really.
Yes, and Wrights Krispy and Nully D.
Wrights Krispy. So just the last question, I think, which this case brings up, Eric, and we'll just run out with this one. As a person who's been involved in police reform, can police be reformed? Is there any hope for reform in this country?
Oh boy, I wish I had been better prepared for that question.
Sorry.
Well, I suppose that I would say, well, first of all, I have insiders. I don't have insiders. I don't want that to come off wrong. There are people within the system that are definitely not my enemy, if that makes sense. And I think you saw a glimpse of that with that one prosecutor, for example. So I get information all the time from, I'm totally having a hard time with this camera. I get information all the time. This looks just like an Eric Brandt show. What the hell? I'm just going to hold the camera. I get information all the time from inside the system. And, Colorado this last year passed some pretty groundbreaking police reform legislation. And some of it's taking years to implement. They're getting time to get up to speed, but they are stripping officers of qualified immunity in Colorado. That means if you sue in state court, federal court still has the qualified immunity doctrine. The fact that they've taken away qualified immunity has had an enormous impact. And sort of one of the undulations that's occurring right now is that thousands, not hundreds, but thousands of law enforcement officers have retired early. There was a particular case that I can't divulge the details on without exposing my source, but where an officer that was highly revered and had been with the department for many years, after the loss of qualified immunity, basically her coworkers went to her and said, "We're not backing you anymore." And a lot of the staff within the system had no idea that she was even a problematic officer. But some of her colleagues knew, and they said, we're not backing you anymore. Part of that police reform law is that now they have a duty to report misconduct, rather than that now they've legally been told that they must cross the blue line. And they're like, we're not going to support you anymore.
They had a,
so they're dropping in droves. Well, now so many have dropping off that they're shorthanded. So now the shitbags that remained are even worse shitbags because they know goddamn well they're not going to be fired while they have this huge shortage of officers. So it's already started to kind of come back up, and who knows where it's going to land quiescently. So
we had a really we have a similar law that might be passed right now, but we had a very interesting thing in Baltimore recently that really stunned everybody. Arrests went down significantly. They stopped arresting people for prostitution and for drug possession, and crime went down at the same time, which really became quite controversial. I don't know why, because everyone was stunned. We're the city that we're policing. We can't get enough of a bad thing, but the truth being,
right.
People were just like beside themselves and still fighting, saying, well, that has nothing to do. We need to keep arresting people, even though the stats said very specifically, less arrests for minor stuff like prostitution, led to less crime. People still went batshit. Like, you still got to do it. So,
and also the Fraternal Order of Police went quite crazy. As a matter of fact, they went into their social media.
They don't really went crazy. They are crazy, but yeah.
Well, they went to their social media account and started saying, criticizing our city state's attorney, who said she's not going to arrest people anymore for marijuana. She's not going to arrest people anymore for simple drug possession. And they were essentially saying that people were going to end up using drugs in the middle of city council meetings simply because our city state's attorney wasn't going to prosecute people for minor amounts of drugs. And they were absolutely fighting to keep the drug war and using every tool at their disposal.
Yeah, there's people sitting on the Diaz with fentanyl patches. Give crime their river.
Right.
But come on. I mean, I don't know what the hope is. I hope that there's hope, like Tom Zebra said, I don't know that there's an end game per se. The work kind of tells you what it needs you to do, but I'll tell you that I can't unsee the things that I've seen. I can't unhear the things that I've heard. I can't unlearn the things that I've learned. And so I have to do it, and I don't know. It's going to require people like me doing it. Otto the Watchdog, he can't do it. He's got kids and they weaponized his children. I mean, it's for the most minor thing, and he still doesn't have his kids. And I don't know what's wrong with Texas, but there's like literally no lawyers down there. But if you've got kids, you can't do this work.
Right.
If you have a mortgage, you can't do this work. If you have a job, you can't do this work. If you have a car payment, you can't do this. You can't do this because they will take everything away from you. And there is no law or rule or regulation or policy or even internal memo that is not so mundane that they're not willing to kill you to enforce it. And that's where the problem comes in. If there's going to be police reform, we need to change the wording. It's not law enforcement that contains the word force. They're not law enforcement officers because they're not trained in matters of law. I have literally asked these questions to officers when I'm in trial. They tout their experience and their training, and there's 6 months of academy, and they're such fantastic creatures. But then I ask them, because they've opened the door now to this question, and I ask them, I say, well, do you do any continuing training? Yeah, well, what are the subjects that you learn? They learn defensive driving, and they learn pain compliance techniques, and how to handcuff people, and all these different ways of inflicting injury and pain on people, up to and including numerous methods of terminating people's lives. And then I asked them, are you required to qualify with a firearm? Yes. Oh, yes. So are you required to spend a certain amount of time a year on the gun range? Yes. Well, how many hours? Well, in Colorado, it's like 16 hours, I think. 16 hours a year on the gun range. And I asked this is a 26-year corporal, by the way, who is a complete buffoon. But I asked him, I said, so how many hours a year do you actually spend on the gun range? More than I can count. And then my next question was, how many hours a year are you required to spend in the law library? And his response was, what's a law library?
Oh, wow.
Okay, so they're not enforcement officers. They're not law enforcement officers. They're just force officers. They receive hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours on force. and practically nothing on law. And
That
so
is
when you've got auditors out there that know more about the law than the officers that they're encountering, this is a problem. So if there is hope for police reform, the reform needs to come in the form of education.
Oh,
I think Eric, you left it at a perfect. That is a perfect.
She is fun and stuff. She is fun and stuff.
That is the perfect way to end
Wow.
it.
That's
Eric,
beautiful.
thank you so much. That was perfect. Tam, why
Thank you
don't
so much.
take us out?
Absolutely, I will. And that was a very special
Thank you, Eric.
conclusion from Eric Brandt of the Eric Brandt Show and Otto the Watchdog. Both of them have channels on YouTube if you want to take a look at them. So this concludes our first ever Auditors and Cop Watcher Summit and our first ever partnership with TrueTube. We would like to thank all of our guests for taking the time to share their stories with us and their insights. And we'd also, of course, like to thank our executive producer, Chris Powers, for his support and guidance. And of course, a big shout out to the behind the scenes technical genius, Friends in Code, and a happy birthday to his friend, EJ. So remember, all of us involved in holding police accountable do so with one goal in mind: making life better for all of us. I don't think I've encountered anyone during the process of reporting on auditing and cop watching who didn't in some way want to improve the lives of their fellow citizens. And this, I think, is the most important takeaway from today's discussion, that we cannot and should not accept the status quo, that policing, like all forms of governance, should serve us, and that it's both our job and our responsibility to make sure they never forget it. In a sense, that's why I'm so passionate about covering my fellow citizen journalists for The Real News. I think it's important for all the diverse branches of media to share information and work to bring a sense of truth and proportion to the public. I think also that the rise in auditing points out how much the American media business has become an instrument of the elites, an institution that covers the battles between billionaires and corporate giants like some sort of royal family, ignoring the stories and suffering of those affected by their injustices. That's why we will continue to partner with TrueTube to bring you informative, revealing, and engaging discussions like the Auditors Summit. I want to thank you all so much for joining us, and please be safe out there.